Carl Jung, the universe gives you pain, only when it's time to awaken. Right now, in this very moment, you're carrying pain you didn't ask for. Pain that feels random, cruel, meaningless. Pain that wakes you at 3 in the morning with questions that have no answers. Pain that follows you through your days like a shadow you can't outrun. And everyone around you, the well-meaning friends, the self-help gurus, the people who've never been where you are, they all have the same tired explanations. They tell you it's random. They tell you to stay positive. They tell you that time heals all wounds, as if pain were just a waiting game, as if suffering were nothing more than bad luck that eventually runs its course. But what if I told you something that contradicts everything you've been taught about pain? What if I told you that your pain isn't punishment, it's an invitation you can only receive when you're finally ready to wake up? This isn't comfort food psychology. This isn't the kind of thing they teach you in therapy or write about in those books with sunrises on the cover. This is something far more ancient, far more precise, and infinitely more unsettling. This is the forbidden insight that Carl Jung spent his entire life trying to articulate, the insight that got him expelled from Freud's inner circle, the insight that made him seem dangerous to the psychiatric establishment of his time. Here it is, and I need you to really hear this. The unconscious doesn't send pain arbitrarily. It doesn't throw suffering at you like dice on a cosmic gambling table. No, the unconscious delivers precise suffering exactly when the psyche is capable of transformation. Not a moment before, not a moment after, exactly when you're ready. Let me tell you about Rebecca. Rebecca was 34 years old when her world collapsed. Her mother died suddenly, a brain aneurysm, no warning, just there one moment and gone the next. 3 weeks later, her husband of 8 years told her he was leaving. He'd met someone else. He'd been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment, and apparently, the right moment was 3 weeks after her mother's funeral. 1 month after that, Rebecca was laid off from the job she'd held for a decade. The company was restructuring. She received the news via email. In the span of 2 months, Rebecca lost her mother, her marriage, and her career. 3 pillars of identity, gone. If you asked anyone looking at Rebecca's life from the outside, they would tell you this was catastrophically bad timing. They would say the universe was cruel, that she was cursed, that no one should have to endure so much loss in such a short period. But here's what no one saw. Here's what Rebecca herself didn't see until years later, after the worst of it had passed and she could finally look back with clear eyes. For the 5 years before her mother's death, Rebecca had been changing. Not obviously, not in ways anyone could point to. But internally, she'd been building something. She'd started therapy 4 years earlier for what she called mild anxiety. In those sessions, she'd begun excavating her childhood, understanding her patterns, recognizing the ways she'd constructed her entire adult life around pleasing others and avoiding conflict. She'd started journaling. She'd developed a meditation practice. She'd built a small circle of genuinely supportive friends who saw her, really saw her, not just the polished performance version of herself she showed the world. She'd been doing this inner work quietly, almost secretly, while her external life continued in its familiar patterns. Her marriage looked fine from the outside. Her job was stable. Her relationship with her mother was complicated but manageable. Everything looked normal, but beneath that normal surface, Rebecca had been secretly preparing for something her conscious mind couldn't even imagine. She'd been building inner resources, psychological strength, emotional depth, spiritual grounding that she didn't even know she'd need. And then, when those resources were finally in place, when she'd reached some invisible threshold of inner capacity that even she wasn't aware of, the universe delivered the losses, all at once, devastatingly, precisely, Here's what Rebecca told me years later, and these were her exact words. If my mother had died when I was 29, it would have destroyed me. If my marriage had ended before I'd done that therapy work, I would have completely lost myself. If I'd lost my job before I'd built that friend circle, I wouldn't have survived. But when it all happened, when it all came crashing down at once, I was ready. I didn't feel ready. I felt like I was dying, but somewhere deep inside, I had exactly what I needed to survive it. It was like something new, like something had been preparing me. This is the sacred wound. This is the central paradox that Jung spent his life exploring. The universe is ruthlessly compassionate. Read that again. The universe is ruthlessly compassionate. It protects you from awakening pain until you're strong enough to let it break you open. It doesn't throw suffering at you randomly. It doesn't test you arbitrarily. It waits. It watches. It prepares you, often without your knowledge, often against your will, for the precise moment when pain will transform rather than destroy you. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." He understood something that most psychological theories refuse to acknowledge, that pain isn't a bug in the system of human existence, it's a feature. It's the primary tool the psyche uses to force consciousness when all gentler methods have failed. But here's the part that changes everything, the part that transforms this from a bitter pill into something approaching grace. The pain arrives exactly when you're ready for it, not when you feel ready. You'll never feel ready. But when you are ready, in the deep unconscious sense of readiness that your ego knows nothing about. Think about the implications of this. Right now, whatever pain you're carrying, whatever loss is breaking your heart, whatever crisis is dismantling your life, it's arriving now, because now is when you can handle it. Now is when you've secretly, unconsciously, invisibly developed the inner resources to let this pain transform you rather than destroy you. Your pain isn't arriving too early. It's not arriving too late. It's arriving on schedule, a schedule your unconscious has been keeping while your conscious mind was busy with other things. This means the question isn't, why is this happening to me? The question is, why now? What has changed in me that I'm ready for this? What has been preparing inside me that I wasn't aware of? What transformation is this pain initiating? These are terrifying questions because they remove you from the comfortable position of victim. They suggest that you are not merely suffering random cruelty, but participating in a process of awakening that your deepest self has somehow consented to, even though your ego is screaming in protest. Let me be absolutely clear about something before we go further. This is not victim blaming. This is not suggesting you chose your trauma or manifested your suffering through insufficient positive thinking. That's spiritual bypass nonsense, and we'll dismantle that kind of toxic thinking later in this journey. What I'm saying is something far more nuanced and far more powerful. Pain comes from many sources, some of it from genuine injustice, some from random chance, some from human cruelty. But the moment that pain crashes into your life, the moment it actually arrives and begins its work on you, that timing is not random. That timing is coordinated by something in you that knows what your conscious mind cannot know, that you're ready now for the transformation this pain makes possible. Rebecca didn't cause her mother's death, her husband's betrayal, or her company's restructuring, but the fact that all three arrived when they did, that timing participated in a deeper pattern, a pattern of readiness she'd been unconsciously weaving for years. This is what Jung meant when he talked about synchronicity, not just meaningful coincidences, but the mysterious way inner readiness and outer events align in moments of transformation. Your psyche and your life circumstances synchronize. They meet each other, and in that meeting, something breaks open. Your pain is that breaking open. But here's the most important thing I can tell you in this first chapter, the thing you need to hold on to as we go deeper into this material. If you're in pain right now, truly in pain, the kind of pain that feels like it might kill you, you're stronger than you know. You have resources you haven't discovered yet. You are ready for something you cannot yet. Imagine the universe doesn't give you pain to punish you. It gives you pain to initiate you, and it only initiates you when initiation becomes possible. So the question isn't why me? The question is why now? What am I being prepared for? What is trying to awaken in me through this suffering? Hold those questions as we continue, because everything that follows is about answering them. Everything that follows is about understanding the precise mechanism by which pain awakens consciousness and recognizing the pattern in your own life, the pattern you couldn't see while you were in it, but which becomes luminously clear once you know what to look for. Your pain has meaning, not the meaning other people try to force onto it, not some cheap inspirational platitude, but real meaning, the meaning of a perfectly timed alarm clock going off in the depths of your soul, calling you to wake up to who you actually are beneath everything you thought you were. That alarm is ringing right now, and my friend, you're ready to hear it, or you wouldn't be here, reading these words, feeling them land somewhere deeper than your thinking mind. It's time to understand why pain arrived when it did. It's time to decode the message. It's time to awaken. Before we can understand awakening, we must understand sleep. Not the sleep you do in bed at night, but the psychological sleep Jung spent his entire career trying to wake people from. The sleep of unconscious living, the sleep of automated existence, the sleep of a life unlived while you're busy living it. Most people aren't actually living. They're sleepwalking through scripts written by parents, culture, trauma, and ego. They're performing a role they never consciously chose, following rules they never agreed to, pursuing goals they never actually wanted, and calling this automated performance my life. Jung understood something radical. The vast majority of human suffering comes not from pain itself, but from the collision between pain and unconsciousness. When pain crashes into a sleeping life, it feels random and meaningless, because the sleeper has no framework for understanding it. They don't see it as an alarm clock because they don't even realize they've been asleep. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus was 38 years old when he had what he called his terrible realization. He was successful by every conventional measure, partner at an architecture firm, beautiful home, respected in his field, married to a woman his family loved, 2 kids in private school. From the outside, Marcus had won at life. He'd checked every box society had told him mattered. But one morning, sitting in his car in the parking lot of his office, Marcus suddenly couldn't remember making a single authentic choice in his entire adult life. He'd become an architect because his father was an architect. He'd joined this particular firm because it was prestigious. He'd married Emily because she was appropriate. Same background, same values, same social circle. They'd had kids because that's what people did at their age. He'd bought the house in the suburbs because that's where successful people lived. He drove a BMW because that's what partners drove. Sitting there in his car, Marcus realized he'd spent 20 years executing a program he'd never written. He was living someone else's life in his own body. Every decision had been automatic, algorithmic, predetermined by invisible code installed decades earlier. And the most disturbing part, the part that made him actually say out loud in his empty car, "Oh my God," was that he had no idea who he actually was underneath all that programming. Marcus was asleep, and he didn't even know he was asleep until that morning when something cracked. This is the first and most important thing you need to understand about awakening. You can't wake up until you recognize you've been sleeping. And most people never recognize it because sleep is so comfortable. so familiar, so universally normalized that it looks like consciousness. Jung called this unconscious living. Let me break down the 4 layers of it, the 4 ways human beings sleep through their own lives while believing they're wide awake. Layer 1, persona automation, living the mask. The persona is Jung's term for the social mask, the false self we construct to navigate the world. We all need a persona. It's the interface between our inner complexity and outer demands. But here's the problem. Most people don't wear their persona, they become their persona. They forget there's anyone underneath the mask. You know this is you if you can't remember the last time you said what you actually thought instead of what was appropriate. If you perform your personality differently with different groups, one version at work, another with family, another with friends, and none of them feel fully real. If you catch yourself saying I should far more often than I want. If you're exhausted by being yourself because yourself is actually a performance. The persona puts you to sleep by making you believe the mask is the face. You forget you're performing and start believing the performance is who you are. Every interaction becomes automatic, scripted responses to predictable situations, following social protocols you never questioned, saying things you don't mean because they're what you're supposed to say. Marcus's entire life was persona. He was performing successful architect, good husband, responsible father, respected colleague. But underneath all those performances, he had no idea. He'd been so busy being what others expected that he'd never asked what he actually wanted. Layer 2, shadow repression, exiling parts of yourself. The shadow is everything you decided was unacceptable about yourself. The anger, the selfishness, the sexuality, the aggression, the darkness, the weakness, the weirdness. The parts of you that didn't fit the persona. You didn't destroy these parts. You just sent them into exile, locked them in the basement of your psyche, and tried to pretend they didn't exist. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It lurks, and everything you refuse to acknowledge in yourself, you'll project onto others. You'll see it everywhere outside you because you refuse to see it inside you. You know you're in shadow sleep if you find yourself repeatedly disgusted by the same qualities in others. If you have strong reactions to people who display traits you pride yourself on not having. If your life feels clean and controlled on the surface, but your dreams are dark and chaotic. If you're secretly jealous of people who express things you've forbidden yourself to express. Shadow repression keeps you asleep by fragmenting you. You're not whole, you're just the acceptable parts performing for approval, while the unacceptable parts scream from the basement. You can't be conscious when half of you is locked away. Marcus had exiled his own ambition, his own anger at his father, his own desire for creative freedom. He'd decided those things were selfish, inappropriate, ungrateful, so he locked them away and performed gratitude and responsibility instead. But the shadow was there, making him secretly resent everyone around him, a resentment he couldn't acknowledge because grateful people don't feel resentful. Layer 3, projection addiction, seeking yourself in others. When you're unconscious, you don't experience yourself directly. You experience yourself through others. Your sense of worth depends on their approval. Your sense of identity depends on their recognition. Your emotions are triggered by their behavior because you've given them the power to carry parts of you that you can't access yourself. This is projection, the unconscious process of putting your own inner material onto other people and then relating to it out there instead of in here. You marry someone who carries your inner feminine or masculine. You hate someone who carries your shadow. You idealize someone who carries your unrealized potential. You're not actually relating to them. You're relating to yourself through them. You know you're addicted to projection if other people have immense power over your emotional state, if you need constant validation, if you're always looking for yourself in someone else's eyes, if your relationships are intense and dramatic because they're actually inner conflicts externalized, if you can't tell where you end and others begin. Projection addiction keeps you asleep by making your inner life inaccessible. You're always looking outside for what's actually inside. You're dependent on others to carry what you refuse to carry yourself. You can't wake up because you're not even living in your own experience. You're living in reaction to everyone else. Marcus had projected his own creative vision onto his father, then spent his whole life resenting his father for having the creative freedom Marcus denied himself. He'd projected his own softness onto his wife, then resented her for being emotional while he stayed controlled. He couldn't access these parts directly, so he lived them through others while remaining unconscious of the pattern. Layer 4. Collective conformity, groupthink as identity. The final layer of sleep is the most insidious because it's invisible. It's the collective unconscious operating as unquestioned consensus reality. These are the assumptions everyone shares, the cultural stories everyone believes, the values everyone holds, the goals everyone pursues. Not because they're true, but because they're unexamined. You know you're in collective conformity when you've never questioned the basic premises of your life. When your values are identical to your social class's values. When your goals look exactly like everyone else's goals. When you're pursuing success as defined by culture, happiness as advertised by media, normalcy as prescribed by consensus. Collective conformity keeps you asleep by making your sleep look like consciousness. Everyone around you is asleep in the exact same way, so it looks like awakeness. You're all dreaming the same dream and calling it reality. Marcus had never questioned the premise that success meant corporate achievement, that happiness meant material security, that a good life meant the one he was living. These weren't his values, they were his culture's values. But because everyone around him shared them, they felt like objective truth. Now, here's why understanding these 4 layers matters for understanding pain. When you're living in this 4-layer sleep, persona automation, shadow repression, projection addiction, collective conformity, your life becomes a pressure cooker of unexpressed truth. You're not living authentically. You're not integrated. You're not sovereign. You're not free. And the psyche, the totality of your being, conscious and unconscious, has a fierce commitment to wholeness. It wants you awake. It wants you integrated. It wants you living your actual life, not performing someone else's. So what does the psyche do when you're this deeply asleep? It sends whispers, little nudges, gut feelings that something's wrong, dreams that disturb you, moments of emptiness in the middle of success, fleeting impulses toward a different life. These are gentle invitations to wake up. Most people ignore them. The sleep is too comfortable. The script is too familiar. The collective agreement is too powerful. So the whispers get ignored. And when whispers don't work, the psyche escalates. Because sleep isn't benign, sleep is death. Living an unlived life is the waste of a consciousness that could have been. And the psyche will not let you waste your consciousness without a fight. So it sends louder alarms, stronger signals, and eventually, if you ignore everything else, it sends pain. Pain is what the psyche uses when all gentler methods have failed. Your pain isn't random. It's the alarm clock you kept hitting snooze on. It's the wake-up call you refused to hear when it came as whisper, nudge, or invitation. Now it's coming as earthquake. Marcus's wake-up call came as existential dread sitting in his car. For others, it comes as illness, loss, betrayal, breakdown, crisis. But the mechanism is the same. Life becomes so uncomfortable in your sleep that staying asleep is no longer an option. Here's the question you need to ask yourself right now, and I mean really ask, not just think about casually. What am I sleepwalking through? Where in your life are you on autopilot, executing scripts you never wrote? Where are you performing a persona that's strangling the person underneath? What parts of yourself have you exiled to the shadow? Who are you using as a screen for your projections? What cultural assumptions are you following without question? Because here's the truth: Jung spent his entire career trying to communicate. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Your pain isn't fate. Your pain is the unconscious trying to become conscious. Your pain is the sleeper trying to wake. Your pain is life itself refusing to let you waste the gift of consciousness by spending it asleep. The universe doesn't give you pain while you're awake and living authentically. It gives you pain when you're asleep and living someone else's life. It gives you pain precisely calibrated to wake you up. So before we go any further into understanding pain's purpose, you have to confront this uncomfortable question: are you awake or are you asleep? And if you're honest, really honest, you already know the answer, because if you were fully awake, you wouldn't be seeking answers about why pain exists. You'd understand it as communication. You'd recognize it as signal. You're here because some part of you knows you've been sleeping. Some part of you knows the pain you're carrying is trying to wake you up. Some part of you is ready, finally, secretly, unconsciously ready, to open your eyes and see what you've been living while you were busy dreaming someone else's dream. The architecture of your sleep has been intricate. You've built a life that looks functional while being fundamentally false. You've performed consciousness while being deeply unconscious. You've called your prison freedom and your sleep awakeness. And now, right now, in this moment, something is cracking. The pain has done its job. It's gotten your attention. You're starting to suspect that everything you thought was real might be performance, projection, and programming. This is the beginning of awakening. This suspicion, this doubt, this crack in the facade. Hold on to it, because what comes next is both terrifying and liberating. Understanding exactly how the psyche escalates its attempts to wake you, and recognizing which stage you're at right now in your own awakening process. The alarm is ringing. You're starting to hear it. Soon, you'll understand why it's been ringing all along, in languages you didn't yet know how to translate. Let's find out what your pain has been trying to tell you, and why it's speaking now. Here's something they don't tell you in traditional psychology. Your pain didn't arrive first. It arrived last. Last, after a long series of increasingly desperate attempts by your unconscious to get your attention. Last, after whispers you ignored, nudges you dismissed, warnings you rationalized, and crises you powered through. Pain is not the psyche's first language. It's the psyche's last resort. Jung observed something that most people never recognize because they're too busy suffering. The unconscious follows a predictable escalation sequence when trying to communicate with consciousness. It's not random, it's not cruel, it's methodical. It's a protocol, a systematic progression from gentle to forceful, from subtle to undeniable. Think of it like this. The unconscious is trying to send you a message. It starts by whispering. If you don't hear the whisper, it speaks louder. If you don't hear that, it shouts. And if you ignore the shout, it brings an earthquake. Most people only pay attention at earthquake. They think the earthquake is the beginning of the problem, but the earthquake is the end of a long conversation they refuse to have. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah was a high-performing marketing executive, 39 years old, married to her college sweetheart, mother of twin boys. By every external measure, she was winning, but internally, something was dying. And it had been dying for 5 years, sending signals Sarah refused to acknowledge. Year 1. The whispers. It started small. Sarah began having this recurring thought on her commute to work. I don't want to go there. Just that. A simple, quiet knowing that would arise every morning as she pulled out of her driveway. She'd feel a subtle contraction in her chest, a mild dread. Nothing dramatic. She dismissed it. Everyone feels this way sometimes, right? Work is work. Nobody loves their job every day. These were thoughts, and she'd been taught not to trust her feelings, to push through, to be responsible. At night, she started having repetitive dreams. In these dreams, she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Or she was running, but her legs wouldn't move. Classic anxiety dreams, common enough. She didn't think they meant anything specific, just stress. She'd deal with it by working harder, sleeping less, pushing through. There were other whispers, a persistent low-grade feeling that something was wrong, though nothing was objectively wrong. Moments of disconnection during sex with her husband, where she'd realize she wasn't really present. Fleeting fantasies about a different life, moving to a small town, opening a bookstore, writing, something creative, something slower. These were whispers, gentle communications from her unconscious saying, "This life you're living isn't yours. This path you're on is misaligned with your actual self. You're performing a role that's killing something vital." Sarah heard the whispers. She just didn't listen. She had reasons, good reasons. The mortgage, the kids' school, her career trajectory. She'd invested 15 years in this path. She couldn't just abandon it because of vague feelings and weird dreams. So the whispers continued. And because they weren't heard, they escalated. Year 2, the nudges. The psyche tried harder. Sarah started experiencing what she called weird coincidences. She'd be thinking about leaving corporate work, and that day 3 different people would randomly mention someone who'd quit to do something unconventional. She'd see the same book about creative careers in 3 different places in 1 week. A former colleague would reach out unprompted to tell her about successfully transitioning to a more meaningful path. Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that arise when the unconscious is trying to communicate. These weren't random, these were nudges. The psyche uses external reality as a mirror when internal signals aren't being received. Sarah also began having small crises, nothing major but disruptive. She got bronchitis that wouldn't go away, forcing her to take 2 weeks off work, her first extended break in years. During that break, she felt strangely relieved, almost happy to be sick, which disturbed her. Her body was forcing rest she wouldn't give herself. Her youngest son started having behavioral issues at school, acting out, getting in trouble. The school counselor suggested the family was experiencing stress. Sarah dismissed this. The family was fine. The stress was just work. Normal stress. She'd handle it. But the nudges kept coming. Small breakdowns in the routine. Unexpected expenses that created financial pressure. Arguments with her husband that seemed to come from nowhere about nothing, but left both of them feeling distant. Her assistant quit suddenly, leaving her overwhelmed. These were nudges, stronger signals. The psyche pushing back against the misalignment, creating friction, making the false life harder to maintain. Sarah acknowledged them as a hard season. She didn't recognize them as communication, so the escalation continued. Year 3-4, the shouts. Now the psyche was shouting. Sarah developed panic attacks. The first one hit during a client presentation. Sudden, overwhelming fear, racing heart, feeling of impending death. She left the room, composed herself in the bathroom, came back and finished the presentation. She told no one. The panic attacks became frequent, daily, multiple times a day. Her body was literally screaming, "Stop, this is not sustainable, you are not living authentically." She went to her doctor. He prescribed anti-anxiety medication. She took it. The panic attacks decreased in intensity, but became a constant background hum of dread. She was medicating the signal without listening to the message. Her body escalated. She developed chronic migraines, severe insomnia, digestive problems. Her immune system weakened. She got sick constantly. Her body was attempting to force her to stop through physical breakdown since psychological distress wasn't working. Her relationships deteriorated. Her marriage became cold, functional, companionate at best. She and her husband barely spoke beyond logistics. The intimacy was gone. Her friendships faded. She had no energy for them, no space for authenticity. She was becoming isolated even in her full life. These were shouts, shouts. The psyche was saying in every possible language, wake up, change course. This path leads to death of self. But Sarah was deeply invested in not listening. She'd built an entire identity around being capable, high-functioning, successful. To admit that something was fundamentally wrong would mean admitting she'd been wrong for years, possibly decades. It would mean facing that she'd built a life that wasn't hers. So she powered through, more medication, more compartmentalization, more performance. She became a master of appearing fine while dying inside. And because the shouts weren't working, the psyche prepared the earthquake. Year 5. The earthquake. It came on a Tuesday. Sarah's husband told her he wanted a divorce. He wasn't angry. He wasn't in love with someone else. He was just done. Done with the marriage that had become a performance. Done with the distance. Done with the woman Sarah had become. Efficient, controlled, absent. He couldn't do it anymore. 3 days later, Sarah was called into a meeting at work. They were restructuring. Her position was being eliminated. After 15 years, she was out. They gave her a generous severance and thanked her for her service. In 1 week, Sarah lost her marriage and her career, the two primary structures of her adult identity. Everything she'd been holding together, everything she'd been performing, everything she'd been sacrificing for, gone. She describes the first month after as total disintegration. She couldn't get out of bed. She stopped functioning. Her parents took the kids. She just lay there in the ruins of her life, with nowhere left to run from the truth she'd been avoiding for 5 years. And in that wreckage, in that total collapse, something interesting happened. Sarah heard the whispers for the first time. Actually, heard them. The quiet voice that had been speaking all along suddenly became audible in the silence created by losing everything else. "This isn't your life," it said. "This has never been your life. And now you have the chance to find out what is. This is the escalation protocol. This is how the psyche tries to wake you. Let me break down the 4 stages explicitly so you can recognize which one you're in. Stage 1, inner whispers. These are subtle intuitions, gut feelings, quiet discontent, dreams that disturb you, fleeting thoughts about a different life. These whispers are easy to dismiss because they're not urgent, they're gentle. They're just feelings, and you've been taught not to trust feelings without evidence. The whisper says, something is misaligned. Pay attention, adjust your course. Most people ignore stage 1 completely. Our culture doesn't teach us to listen to inner whispers. It teaches us to ignore them, push through them, be productive despite them. Stage 2, synchronistic nudges. When whispers don't work, the psyche begins orchestrating your external reality to mirror your internal conflict. Meaningful coincidences appear. Small crises emerge. Unexpected opportunities present themselves. People enter your life with messages you need to hear. The nudge says, look, the message is appearing in your external life now. I'm using reality itself to communicate because you're not hearing me internally. Many people recognize stage 2 as weird timing or strange patterns, but they don't understand them as communication. They dismiss them as coincidence, stress, or bad luck. Stage 3, somatic shouts. When nudges fail, the body intervenes. Illness, exhaustion, accidents, panic attacks, chronic pain. The body becomes the messenger because it can't be intellectualized or dismissed as easily as thoughts and feelings. The shout says, I'm making it impossible for you to continue this way. Your body is refusing what your mind still accepts. You must stop and listen. Some people finally pay attention at stage 3. Others, like Sarah initially, medicate the symptoms and continue the pattern. treating the messenger as the problem rather than recognizing it as communication. Stage 4. Existential earthquakes. When nothing else works, the psyche orchestrates or allows major life collapse, divorce, job loss, financial crisis, serious illness, death of a loved one, breakdown. The structures you've built come crashing down, forcing you to confront what you've been avoiding. The earthquake says, everything false must fall. I'm destroying what isn't real so you can finally discover what is. This isn't punishment. This is liberation disguised as catastrophe. Most people only wake up at earthquake, and even then, some people rebuild the same structures and go back to sleep, requiring another earthquake in the future. Here's what you need to understand. The escalation protocol is mercy. Read that again. The escalation protocol is mercy. The psyche doesn't start with earthquakes. It starts with whispers. It gives you every possible chance to wake up gently, to adjust your course before crisis becomes necessary. It's only when you refuse every gentle option that it brings force. This means if you're in pain now, if you're experiencing an earthquake, it's because you ignored every softer signal that came before. But it also means something else, something surprisingly hopeful. Your psyche hasn't given up on you. If your unconscious had given up, it would go quiet. It would let you sleepwalk into death, comfortable and unconscious. The fact that it's bringing an earthquake means it still believes you can wake up. It still believes transformation is possible. It still believes you're worth the effort of forcing awake. Pain is proof the psyche still cares. Pain is proof you're still worth waking. Now I need you to do something difficult. I need you to look back at your own life and identify the escalation sequence you've been living through. Most people can't see it while they're in it. But if you look back with honest eyes, you'll see the pattern. What were your whispers? Those early intuitions you dismissed? Those dreams you ignored? Those fleeting thoughts about a different life? What were your nudges? Those coincidences that seemed meaningful? Those small crises that disrupted your routine? Those people who showed up with messages you didn't want to hear? What were your shouts? Illness, panic, exhaustion, relationship deterioration, the body and psyche screaming what you refuse to hear. And what is your earthquake? The loss that's breaking you open right now, the crisis that's dismantling everything, the pain that finally got your attention. When you see the escalation sequence in your own life, something shifts. You stop experiencing pain as random cruelty and start recognizing it as the final stage of a long conversation you refuse to have. This doesn't make the pain hurt less, but it changes what the pain means. It stops being meaningless suffering and becomes purposeful communication. You stop being a victim of random catastrophe and become someone whose own psyche is fighting desperately to wake them up. Sarah eventually got this. It took her 2 years of therapy, self-examination, and brutal honesty, but she finally understood. The earthquake of her divorce and job loss wasn't the beginning of her problems. It was the culmination of 5 years of ignored communication. And once she understood the pattern, she could never unhear it again. She told me something I'll never forget. I spent so much time asking, why is this happening to me? But the real question was, why did it take this much pain to get my attention? And the answer to that question was humbling. It took this much pain because I refused to listen to anything less. Here's the uncomfortable truth that comes with understanding the escalation protocol. You bear some responsibility for how loudly the psyche had to shout. This isn't victim blaming. If someone abused you, betrayed you, or harmed you, that's not your fault. But the timing of when those things affected you, the intensity with which they dismantled you, the way they functioned as wake-up calls in your life, that participated in a pattern where you'd been refusing to wake up through gentler means. The universe didn't need to break you this hard if you'd listened when it whispered. But you didn't listen. Most of us don't. We're too scared, too invested in our familiar suffering, too convinced we have to keep performing the life we've built. And so the whispers become nudges, become shouts, become earthquakes, and we sit in the rubble wondering why the universe is so cruel, when actually it's been trying to save us from ourselves for years. But here's the mercy hidden in all of this. It's never too late to start listening. Even if you're at earthquake right now, even if everything has collapsed, you can choose to hear the message now. You can choose to stop rebuilding the false structures and start discovering what's real. You can choose to interpret this pain as initiation rather than punishment. And if you're in an earlier stage, if you're at whispers, nudges, or even shouts, you can choose to listen now. You can save yourself from the earthquake by paying attention while the signals are still survivable. The question is, which stage are you in? And more importantly, are you listening? Because here's what I've learned from studying Jung and from witnessing hundreds of people's awakening processes. The psyche will continue escalating until you wake up or die. Those are the only two options. Wake up or die, literally or metaphorically, physically or psychologically. The psyche will not let you sleepwalk forever. It has a ruthless commitment to your consciousness, and it will bring whatever level of force is necessary to interrupt your unconscious living. So you can wake up at whisper, you can wake up at nudge, you can wake up at shout, or you can require an earthquake, but you will wake up. Or you will die asleep, having wasted the precious gift of consciousness on performing someone else's life. Jung said, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. The whispers are dreams. The nudges are synchronicities. The shouts are symptoms. The earthquakes are crises. They're all doors. They're all invitations to enter the sanctuary of your actual self and stop living in the facade. The only question is, which door will you finally walk through? How loudly will the psyche have to knock before you answer?" Sarah answered at earthquake. It nearly destroyed her, but it also saved her life. 5 years after her world collapsed, she told me she was grateful, actually grateful, not in a toxic positivity way, but in a deep, genuine way. She was grateful the universe loved her enough to destroy what wasn't real. She was grateful her psyche fought hard enough to force her awake. She was grateful for the earthquake that finally got her attention. She's living differently now, simpler, more authentic, less impressive from the outside, more real from the inside. She writes, she has deep friendships. She's alone but not lonely. She listens to the whispers now. When she feels that familiar contraction in her chest, she doesn't dismiss it. She investigates it. When synchronicities appear, she pays attention. She doesn't need earthquakes anymore because she's learned to respond to whispers. This is what's possible on the other side of understanding the escalation protocol. You become someone who can self-correct before crisis. You become someone who listens to the early signals. You develop a relationship with your unconscious that's collaborative rather than combative. But you can only get there by first understanding how you've been ignoring the escalation in your own life. You have to look back honestly and see how long the psyche has been trying to reach you. You have to confront how invested you've been in not listening. This is uncomfortable work. It requires admitting you've been asleep. It requires acknowledging you've ignored your own inner guidance for months, years, maybe decades. It requires taking responsibility for the fact that your psyche had to bring an earthquake because you refused to hear anything gentler. But this discomfort is itself part of the awakening. This recognition, this moment where you see the pattern and realize you've been ignoring it. This is consciousness emerging. This is you waking up. The escalation protocol doesn't exist to punish you. It exists because consciousness is so valuable, so precious, so sacred that the psyche will fight with every tool available to prevent you from wasting it on sleep. Your pain isn't random. It's the final stage of a long, patient, progressively intense attempt by your own deepest self to wake you up to who you actually are. And the fact that you're here reading this, recognizing the pattern, that means it's working. The earthquake has gotten your attention. You're listening now. The pain has done its job. Now the question is, what will you do with this awakening? Will you rebuild the same structures and go back to sleep? Or will you use this crisis as the initiation it's meant to be, the doorway into a life that's actually yours? The psyche has brought you this far. It's gotten you to the threshold. But you have to choose to walk through. You have to choose to hear the message beneath the pain. You have to choose to wake up. So I'm asking you directly, what stage are you in right now? Can you identify the whispers you've been ignoring, the nudges you've been dismissing, the shouts you've been medicating, the earthquake that's currently breaking you open? And more importantly, are you ready to listen? Are you ready to stop experiencing pain as punishment and start recognizing it as the escalating voice of your own soul, fighting desperately to wake you up before it's too late? The alarm is ringing. You've been hitting snooze for years, but at some point you have to get out of bed. You have to open your eyes. You have to face what you've been dreaming through. That point is now. That point is always now. And the pain you're in, that's not the problem. That's the solution the psyche has delivered, because nothing else worked. Listen to it. Not to what it hurts like, but to what it's saying. Because underneath the pain, there's a message. And that message is trying to save your life. There's a question that haunts everyone who experiences devastating loss. Why now? Why did my parent die now instead of 10 years ago? Why did this relationship end now instead of earlier? Why did I lose my job at this particular moment in my life? The timing seems arbitrary, cruel, perfectly calibrated to cause maximum disruption. But what if the timing isn't arbitrary? What if there's a mysterious mechanism operating beneath the surface of your conscious awareness? A mechanism that's been preparing you for this moment longer than you've been aware of. This is what Jung called the Kairos moment, sacred timing, the intersection of inner readiness and outer event. Not Chronos time, the linear time of clocks and calendars, but Kairos time, the qualitative time of meaning and transformation. Here's the readiness paradox, and you need to really sit with this. You don't feel ready for the pain you're experiencing. You feel blindsided, overwhelmed, underprepared. Every cell in your body is screaming that you can't handle this, but your unconscious knows something your ego doesn't know. Your unconscious knows you are ready. Not ready in the sense that it will be easy or painless, but ready in the sense that you have the capacity, hidden, dormant, unrecognized capacity, to let this pain transform you rather than destroy you. The psyche knows your capacity better than your ego does, and it waits. It waits until the perfect convergence of inner preparation and outer possibility. It waits until you're strong enough to survive the breaking, even though you don't feel strong enough. Let me tell you about David. When David was 25 years old, his father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months. David had a close relationship with his father. His father was his hero, his primary source of identity, the person David was trying to become. The thought of losing him was unbearable. But then something unexpected happened. His father went into spontaneous remission. The cancer disappeared. The doctors called it a miracle. David's father lived. 20 years later, when David was 45, his father was diagnosed with cancer again. Different cancer, same prognosis, 6 months. This time, there was no remission. His father died exactly when the doctors predicted. At his father's funeral, standing at the grave, David had an overwhelming realization. If his father had died at 25, it would have destroyed him, completely destroyed him. At 25, David had no independent identity. His entire sense of self was constructed around his father's approval. Losing his father then would have meant losing himself. But at 45, David had built a life. He'd become his own person. He'd succeeded and failed independent of his father's shadow. He'd developed his own values, his own identity, his own measure of worth. The loss of his father at 45 was devastating, make no mistake. But it didn't destroy him. It transformed him. It forced him to claim an authority over his own life that he'd never fully claimed while his father was alive. Same event, different timing, opposite outcomes. David told me, standing at that grave, I understood something that made my blood run cold. The first cancer, that wasn't a medical anomaly. That was grace. Something in the universe knew I wasn't ready. I couldn't have survived that loss at 25, so I was given 20 more years. 20 years to become someone who could withstand the transformation that loss would bring. This is the readiness mechanism. This is the invisible preparation period that Jung spent his career trying to help people recognize. The pain you're experiencing right now didn't arrive randomly. It arrived after a period of preparation you didn't know was happening. It arrived after you'd secretly, unconsciously, invisibly developed the exact resources you'd need to survive it. Let me explain how this works because it's one of the most extraordinary aspects of the psyche's operation. The invisible preparation period. Life has been preparing you for this moment longer than you've been conscious of. While you were living your normal life, thinking about normal things, pursuing normal goals, something beneath consciousness was building a foundation strong enough to withstand what was coming. This preparation takes many forms, skills you didn't know you'd need. In the years before a major crisis, people often develop specific capabilities that will become essential. Sarah, the marketing executive from the last chapter, had spent 3 years in therapy learning emotional regulation techniques before her life collapsed. She'd thought she was just dealing with anxiety, but when the earthquake came, those techniques were the only thing that kept her from complete psychological dissolution. The therapy wasn't about anxiety, it was preparation for what was coming. Relationships that will hold you. In the period before major transformation, people often unconsciously build support structures. You make a new friend who seems random at the time, but who will become essential during crisis. You deepen a relationship that has been superficial. You join a community that will catch you when you fall. These don't feel like preparation. They feel like normal social life, but the psyche is secretly weaving a safety net. David spent his 30s and early 40s building deep male friendships, something he'd never prioritized before. When his father died, these men held him in a way his wife couldn't, in a way his children couldn't. They reflected back to him a masculine strength that didn't depend on his father's existence. He'd been unconsciously preparing a replacement father circle for 20 years without knowing why. Inner strength. You didn't recognize the most mysterious form of preparation is the development of psychological resilience through earlier suffering. Every painful experience you've survived has built capacity for the next one. You think you're just getting through each crisis independently, but actually you're training. You're building psychological muscles you don't yet know you'll need. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to hold tension between opposites and generate new consciousness from that tension. Every time you've sat with discomfort without collapsing or dissociating, you've strengthened this function. Every time you've faced truth instead of avoiding it, you've prepared yourself for deeper truth. Every time you've felt pain and not numbed it, you've increased your capacity for transformation through pain. The person you are right now, in this moment of suffering, is not the person you would have been 5 years ago or 10 years ago. You have capacities now you didn't have then, resources, depths, strengths. They've been developing invisibly while you were focused on other things. Insights that become essential. In the years before transformation, people often encounter ideas, teachings, or philosophies that seem interesting but not immediately relevant. You read a book that affects you, but you're not sure why. You have a conversation that sticks with you. You learn a concept that resonates in a way you can't articulate. These are seeds being planted. The psyche is preparing you with the exact conceptual framework you'll need to make meaning of what's coming. When the crisis hits, these ideas suddenly become vital. They give you language for the unlanguageable. They give you maps for territory that would otherwise be incomprehensible. Many people discover Jung during or after crisis and feel like they've found a missing piece. But often, if you look back, you'll find that Jung's ideas were trying to reach you earlier, in recommended books you didn't read, in conversations you half remembered, in fleeting interests you didn't pursue. The psyche was trying to give you the map before you needed it. When you finally read Jung during crisis, it's not discovery, it's recognition of preparation that was happening all along. The readiness recognition framework. So how do you know if you're ready for the pain you're experiencing? How do you identify these hidden resources when you feel utterly resourceless? Ask yourself these questions. What capacities have I developed in the last 5 years that I didn't have before? Think broadly, not just skills, but also emotional capacities, relational abilities, psychological strengths. What can you hold now that you couldn't hold then? What relationships have deepened or formed in recent years? Who has entered your life that's now essential to your survival? Who has unexpectedly shown up to support you? These people aren't random. They're part of your preparation. What earlier pain did I survive that prepared me for this pain? Every suffering you've endured has built capacity. What did previous losses teach you? What did earlier betrayals strengthen in you? You're not starting from zero. You're building on a foundation of survived suffering. What ideas or teachings have been trying to reach me? What books kept appearing? What concepts kept recurring in conversations? What wisdom was knocking on your door that you've now opened? These weren't accidents. These were the psyche preparing your conceptual framework for transformation. What parts of my life had to be in place before this could happen? Look at what you've built. Your career, your home, your savings, your independence, your identity separate from what you've lost. What needed to exist before this loss could be survivable? When David answered these questions about his father's death, he realized that the 20 years between the first diagnosis and the second were filled with invisible preparation. He'd built a successful business, financial security his father never had. He'd gotten married and had children. Continuation of legacy. He'd gone to therapy and worked through his father wound while his father was still alive. Separation and individuation that made loss possible. He'd developed a spiritual practice, framework for meaning beyond material existence. None of these things felt like preparation at the time. They felt like normal life progression. But in retrospect, every single one was necessary for David to survive his father's death without being destroyed by it. This is what I mean by the readiness paradox. You are ready in ways you can't recognize until after the fact. You've been preparing without knowing you were preparing. The universe has been building your capacity in secret, in the background of your ordinary life, calibrating you for exactly this moment. The universe protects you from pain that would destroy. Here's the controversial thesis that emerges from understanding the readiness mechanism. The universe doesn't protect you from pain, but it does protect you from pain that would destroy rather than transform you. There's a precise calibration happening. The psyche knows the difference between pain that will break you open and pain that will just break you, between pain that will initiate transformation and pain that will cause trauma too severe to metabolize. This doesn't mean all pain is good or deserved or necessary. Some pain is just violence, just cruelty, just randomness. But even random pain interacts with a readiness mechanism. The way pain lands on you, the way it affects you, the transformation it makes possible, that's calibrated to what you can actually handle, even when it feels like more than you can handle. David's story illustrates this perfectly. The first cancer when he was 25. His father's remission wasn't medical miracle. It was mercy. David wasn't ready. The loss would have been purely traumatic, purely destructive. So the universe held back. It gave him 20 more years. But the second cancer when he was 45, no remission, because now David was ready. Now the loss could transform him. Now he had the resources to let his father's death make him more fully himself instead of making him nobody. Same event, different timing. The difference was readiness. And here's what's both terrifying and liberating about this. If you're in catastrophic pain right now, it means your unconscious has assessed that you're ready for it. Not comfortable with it, not happy about it, but capable of letting it transform rather than destroy you. Your psyche knows your capacity better than you do. It's been tracking your development longer than your ego has been aware. And it's delivered this pain at precisely the moment when transformation becomes possible. You're stronger than you think. You have resources you don't recognize. You've been preparing longer than you know. The pain feels like too much because ego always thinks it's too much. Ego wants comfort, safety, familiarity. Ego would keep you asleep forever if it could. But the self, the deeper totality of your being, knows you can handle this, knows you're ready, knows this pain is precisely calibrated to break you open without breaking you apart. Jung wrote, "The psyche is not of today. Its ancestry goes back many millions of years. Individual consciousness is only the flower and the fruit of a season, sprung from the perennial rhizome beneath the earth." You are not just your conscious awareness. You are not just your ego's assessment of your capacity. You are the flower on the surface and the ancient root system beneath. And that root system, that unconscious depth, knows things your surface awareness doesn't know. It's been alive longer, it's wiser, it's preparing you in ways you can't track. So when the pain comes, when it feels like too much, like more than you can possibly survive, trust that something deeper than your ego has assessed your readiness. Trust that you've been prepared even though you don't feel prepared. Trust that you have resources you haven't discovered yet, capacities you haven't accessed, strengths you haven't needed until now. The question isn't why me, it's why now. This reframes everything. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me, which keeps you in victim consciousness, you ask, why is this happening now? What has shifted in me that makes this pain arrive at this moment? What have I been unconsciously preparing that makes this transformation possible now? These questions move you from passive victim to active participant in your own awakening. They help you recognize that while you didn't choose the pain, you are somehow prepared for it in ways you can't fully see yet. This doesn't make the pain hurt less, but it changes what the pain means. It stops being random cruelty and becomes precise timing. It stops being evidence that the universe hates you and becomes evidence that the universe knows you're ready for something you don't yet know you're ready for. David stood at his father's grave and felt this viscerally. The grief was enormous, but underneath the grief was something else, a recognition that he'd been prepared for this moment for 20 years, that every struggle, every achievement, every insight, every relationship had been unconsciously preparing him to survive this loss and let it transform him. He was ready. He didn't feel ready, but he was ready, and so are you. Right now, in whatever pain you're carrying, you're more ready than you realize. You've been preparing longer than you know. The universe has been secretly building your capacity in the background of your ordinary life. The alarm is ringing at exactly the right time, not a moment too soon, not a moment too late, exactly when you're capable of waking up. The question is, will you recognize your own readiness? Will you trust the timing even when it feels cruel? Will you look for the hidden resources you've been developing instead of just focusing on the pain? Because they're there. The capacities, the relationships, the insights, the strength, they've been growing in you silently, preparing you for exactly this initiation. You are ready to wake up. The universe wouldn't be shaking you this hard if you weren't. The pain has arrived on schedule. Your schedule, the one your unconscious has been keeping while your conscious mind was busy with other things. It's time, and you're ready. Even though you don't feel ready, especially because you don't feel ready, trust the timing, trust the preparation, trust that you're stronger than you know. The awakening is beginning, and you've been preparing for it longer than you've been aware. Now we enter the most uncomfortable territory in all of Jungian psychology. This is where most people turn back, where the awakening becomes too threatening to continue. Because this category of pain doesn't reveal external truth, it reveals internal darkness. This pain doesn't wake you up to what others have done to you. It wakes you up to what you are capable of doing to others. Jung spent decades trying to get people to understand something that contradicts our deepest wish to see ourselves as fundamentally good. You are not fundamentally good. You are not fundamentally bad either. You are fundamentally whole, which means you contain both light and darkness, both creation and destruction, both love and hate, and the parts you've denied, the parts you've called not me, the parts you've exiled to what Jung called the shadow. Those parts are operating in your life, whether you acknowledge them or not. Shadow pain is the psyche's most brutal tool for forcing you to meet your darkness, and it arrives precisely when you can no longer afford the luxury of innocence. Let me tell you about Jennifer, and I'm telling you this story because it reveals something most people deny until they can't deny it anymore. Jennifer was 36 years old when her best friend betrayed her. They'd been close for 8 years, the kind of friendship that felt like soulmateship. They knew each other's secrets, fears, dreams. They'd supported each other through breakups, career changes, family crises. Jennifer trusted this woman completely. And then, without warning, without explanation, this friend did something unforgivable. She slept with Jennifer's boyfriend, not in a moment of drunken weakness, deliberately, repeatedly, secretly, for months. And when Jennifer found out, her friend showed no remorse, just cold indifference, as if Jennifer's pain was irrelevant, as if the friendship had never mattered. Jennifer was destroyed, not just hurt, destroyed. She spent months in a victim rage that felt righteous and consuming. How could someone she loved do something so cruel? How could someone betray her so completely? What kind of person was capable of this level of cruelty? She processed the betrayal in therapy. Week after week, she talked about the injustice, the shock, the violation of trust. Her therapist listened, supported, validated. And then, 3 months in, her therapist asked a question that changed everything. "Jennifer," she said gently, "have you ever betrayed anyone like this?" Jennifer's immediate response was outrage. Of course not. Never. She would never do what her friend did. That's what made this so unforgivable. She herself was incapable of such cruelty. Never, her therapist pressed, never betrayed a friend, never hurt someone who trusted you, never chosen your own desires over someone else's well-being? And then something cracked. A memory surfaced that Jennifer had successfully repressed for almost 15 years. When Jennifer was 21, she had a close friend named Rachel. They'd been inseparable in college. Rachel was dating a guy named Mark. Jennifer developed feelings for Mark, She told herself it was innocent attraction, nothing she'd act on. But then during a party when Rachel was out of town, Jennifer and Mark slept together. It happened once. Jennifer felt terrible. She never told Rachel. She distanced herself from both of them, let the friendship fade, graduated, moved away, and buried the memory. She'd constructed a narrative where that incident was different. She'd been young, drunk, confused. It wasn't real betrayal. It was a mistake she'd learned from. But sitting in therapy, the memory returning in full force, Jennifer finally had to confront the truth. She had done exactly what her friend just did to her. She had betrayed someone who trusted her. She had chosen her own desire over a friend's well-being. She had damaged someone she loved and then hidden from the consequences. The pain shifted. It wasn't just about what had been done to her anymore. It was about what she was capable of doing. The betrayal she'd experienced wasn't just revealing her friend's darkness. It was revealing her own. It was holding up a mirror and forcing her to see what she'd spent 15 years refusing to see. This is shadow pain. This is the psyche's most ruthless teaching. The shadow, your exiled self. Jung defined the shadow as everything you've decided is unacceptable about yourself and therefore denied, repressed, or projected onto others. It's not evil. It's just everything that doesn't fit your ego's self-image. If you see yourself as kind, your shadow contains your cruelty. If you see yourself as strong, your shadow contains your weakness. If you see yourself as rational, your shadow contains your irrationality. If you see yourself as victim, your shadow contains your capacity for victimizing. The shadow forms early in life. You learn from parents, culture, religion, and peers which parts of you are acceptable and which must be hidden. The aggressive child is taught aggression is bad, so aggression goes into shadow. The sensitive boy is taught sensitivity is weakness, so sensitivity goes into shadow. The ambitious girl is taught ambition is unfeminine, so ambition goes into shadow. These parts don't disappear. They just operate unconsciously. They leak out in ways you don't recognize. They appear in your dreams as threatening figures. They show up in the people you irrationally hate. They emerge in moments of stress when your conscious control weakens. And most importantly, and this is Jung's key insight, what you refuse to own in yourself, you will attract from others. You will find it, judge it, rage against it, obsess over it in the external world because that's the only place you'll let yourself see it. Jennifer couldn't own her capacity for betrayal, so she attracted betrayal from outside. The universe gave her exactly the experience she needed to meet her shadow, to see in someone else what she couldn't see in herself. This is how shadow pain works. It doesn't arrive to show you that other people are bad. It arrives to show you that you contain the same darkness you judge in others. The mechanism, projection and recognition. Here's the psychological mechanism, and once you understand this, you'll never be able to unsee it. When you encounter a quality in someone else that triggers intense emotional reaction, disgust, rage, obsession, you're not just reacting to them, you're reacting to a projected part of yourself. The intensity of your reaction is proportional to how much you've repressed that quality in yourself. People who mildly annoy you aren't carrying your shadow. People who enrage you, who disgust you, who you can't stop thinking about, who seem to embody everything you despise, they're carrying your shadow. They're mirrors. And the reason you can't look away is because some part of you recognizes itself in them, even while your ego violently denies it. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You don't wake up by affirming your goodness. You wake up by confronting your shadow, by recognizing that you are capable of everything you judge in others, by owning your capacity for cruelty, betrayal, weakness, violence, selfishness. All of it. This is excruciating work. because it requires admitting you're not who you thought you were. It requires acknowledging that your moral superiority is an illusion, that your judgments of others are projections, that the darkness you see out there is actually in here. The shadow pain recognition process. How do you know if your pain is shadow pain? How do you distinguish between genuine victimization and shadow recognition? Ask yourself these questions and be brutally honest. Am I fixated on the moral dimensions of this pain? If you can't stop talking about how wrong the other person was, how unjust their actions were, how you would never do what they did, that's a sign. Not that they weren't wrong, but that the moral intensity might be covering shadow material. Have I ever done anything similar, even in a different context? Don't let yourself off easy here. If someone betrayed you, have you ever betrayed anyone? Maybe not in the exact same way, but the same essential act. If someone abandoned you, have you ever abandoned anyone? If someone was selfish, have you ever chosen yourself over someone else's needs? Does this pain make me feel morally superior? Shadow pain often comes with a feeling of vindication, proof that you're good and they're bad, that you're victim and they're villain. If your pain is reinforcing your sense of being morally better than others, shadow material is present. What am I learning about others versus what am I learning about myself? If the pain is only teaching you about others' capacity for harm, it's incomplete. Shadow pain will eventually turn inward and teach you about your own capacity for the same harm. Am I defending against a recognition? If someone suggests you might have done something similar, do you react with immediate, intense defensiveness? That defensiveness is often protecting shadow material from consciousness. Jennifer's betrayal hit all these markers. She was fixated on the moral wrongness of it. She felt morally superior. She would never do that. She was learning only about her friend's capacity for cruelty, not her own. And when her therapist suggested she might have done something similar, her initial reaction was violent defensiveness. But once the shadow recognition broke through, once she remembered Rachel and Mark, everything shifted. The pain didn't decrease, but it transformed. It stopped being about her friend's badness and became about her own capacity for the same badness. The betrayal became a mirror instead of an attack. The brutal compassion of shadow pain. Why does the psyche do this? Why force you to confront your own darkness through experiencing it from others? Because integration is impossible without shadow recognition. You cannot become whole while disowning half of yourself. You cannot be conscious while projecting your darkness onto others. You cannot be free while your shadow operates unconsciously, controlling you from beneath awareness. Shadow pain is brutal compassion. It's the psyche saying, you need to see this about yourself. You've been avoiding it, so I'm going to show it to you in someone else, in a way you can't ignore, in a way that will break through your defenses. The person who betrayed you, who hurt you, who disappointed you, they're not the villain in this story. They're the teacher. They're carrying the shadow material you've been denying, and the universe orchestrated your connection to them precisely so you'd be forced to see in them what you refuse to see in yourself. This doesn't excuse their behavior. They're still responsible for their choices, but it changes your relationship to the pain. You stop being pure victim and become someone who's being shown something about themselves they need to see. The hidden gift, liberation through ownership. Here's what happens when you finally own your shadow. You stop attracting it from outside. Read that again. When you own your shadow, you stop attracting it from outside. As long as you project your darkness onto others, the universe has to keep sending people to mirror it back to you. You'll attract betrayers if you deny your capacity for betrayal. You'll attract narcissists if you deny your own narcissism. You'll attract abusers if you deny your own capacity for violence. But when you own it, when you fully acknowledge, yes, I am capable of betrayal, cruelty, selfishness, violence, something extraordinary happens. the projection stops. And when the projection stops, the attraction stops. Jennifer's life changed after her shadow recognition. Not immediately. It took time, therapy, serious shadow work. But gradually, she stopped attracting betrayers. The next friendship she formed was with someone who had also done shadow work, who could own her darkness, who didn't need to play out unconscious dramas. And more importantly, Jennifer stopped betraying others, not because she became morally superior, but because she became conscious. She could see the impulse toward betrayal when it arose, the attraction to someone else's partner, the temptation to choose herself over a friend's well-being. And because she could see it, she could choose differently. Consciousness gave her choice. Shadow ownership gave her freedom. This is the gift. Shadow pain doesn't wake you up to your goodness. It wakes you up to your wholeness. And wholeness includes your monstrosity. You are capable of everything you judge. You contain both light and darkness. And owning that truth is what makes you actually human, instead of performing being human. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. This is disagreeable. This is why most people refuse shadow work. It's easier to stay innocent, to project darkness onto others, to maintain the illusion that you're fundamentally good and others are fundamentally bad. But that innocence has a cost. It keeps you unconscious. It keeps you controlled by the shadow material operating beneath awareness. It keeps you attracting pain from others who are carrying what you refuse to carry yourself. The awakening that shadow pain brings is the hardest one, because it's not an awakening to being wronged. It's an awakening to being capable of the same wrong. It's not about discovering others' capacity for harm. It's about discovering your own. A personal confession. I need to tell you something I've never publicly shared, because this teaching only has authority if I'm willing to be vulnerable about my own shadow work. 5 years ago, I experienced what I thought was a profound betrayal. Someone I'd mentored, someone I'd invested years in supporting and guiding, turned on me publicly. They spread lies about me, distorted private conversations, damaged my reputation in our shared community. I felt victimized, wronged, shocked by their cruelty. I spent months processing this betrayal. I talked about it with friends, with my therapist, with anyone who would listen, and the story I told was always the same. I had been generous, supportive, trustworthy, and they had repaid that with malice. I was the innocent victim. They were the villain. Then one night, I had a dream. In the dream, I was standing in front of a mirror, but the reflection wasn't me. It was the person who'd betrayed me. And as I stared at the reflection, their face slowly transformed into mine. I woke up with my heart pounding, knowing immediately what the dream meant, but not wanting to face it. It took me 3 more months to admit the truth. I had done to someone else exactly what had been done to me. 10 years earlier, I'd had a mentor who invested deeply in my development, and when I felt ready to move beyond their influence, when I wanted to establish my own authority, I turned on them, not as dramatically as had been done to me, but the essential pattern was identical. I'd distanced myself abruptly. I'd privately criticized them to others. I'd positioned myself as having outgrown them, implicitly diminishing their contribution to my growth. At the time, I'd rationalized it. I was just individuating, establishing boundaries, finding my own voice. I wasn't betraying them. I was growing up. But looking at it honestly, with the mirror of my own pain forcing me to see clearly, I recognized the truth. I had betrayed them. I had hurt someone who loved me. I had been capable of exactly the cruelty I was now experiencing. The shadow recognition was devastating. It destroyed my innocent victim narrative. I couldn't hate my betrayer with the same self-righteous intensity anymore because I'd seen myself in them. I couldn't call them a monster because I'd have to call myself a monster too. But something extraordinary happened after I owned this. The obsessive pain stopped. Not the hurt was still there. But the obsessive, consuming, victim rage stopped. Because I wasn't fighting projection anymore. I wasn't trying to maintain an illusion of my own innocence. I could just hurt cleanly without the secondary pain of denied shadow. And I never betrayed a mentee again. Not because I became morally superior, but because I became conscious of the pattern. I could see the impulse toward betrayal when it arose, the desire to distance myself from someone's influence, the urge to diminish their contribution to establish my own authority. And because I could see it, I could choose differently. This is what shadow pain does. It forces you into an awareness you'd rather avoid. It destroys your innocence, but it gives you something far more valuable: consciousness, choice, freedom from unconscious repetition. I'm telling you this because shadow work requires someone willing to go first, willing to model the vulnerability of owning darkness. If I'm going to ask you to confront your shadow, I have to show you mine. I have to demonstrate that this work is possible, that it doesn't destroy you, that on the other side of shadow recognition is something approaching wholeness. The timing of shadow pain. So why does shadow pain arrive when it does? What makes you ready for this particular awakening? Shadow pain arrives when you've built an ego strong enough to survive its dissolution. You can only confront your shadow when your sense of self is stable enough to withstand the recognition that you're not who you thought you were. If shadow recognition comes too early, before you've developed a coherent identity, it can be traumatizing rather than transforming. You need a self to disillusion before disillusionment serves growth. But if shadow recognition never comes, you stay fragmented, projecting, unconscious. You spend your whole life reacting to darkness in others while remaining blind to the same darkness in yourself. The universe gives you shadow pain when you're finally strong enough to own your darkness without collapsing into it. When you've developed enough psychological stability to look at your monster and say, yes, that's also me, without losing your sense of basic worth. Jennifer could receive the shadow recognition at 36 that would have destroyed her at 21. At 21, her ego was too fragile. She needed to repress the betrayal of Rachel to maintain her self-concept. But by 36, she'd built a strong enough identity that she could look at what she'd done, own it fully, and integrate it without falling apart. David, from the last chapter, could recognize his shadow relationship with his father, the unconscious competition, the suppressed resentment, the ways he'd secretly wished for his father's diminishment, only after his father died. While his father was alive, that recognition would have been too threatening to his conscious love for his father. But after death, with nothing left to protect, he could see the fullness of his ambivalence, the darkness mixed with the light. The integration, beyond good and evil. The final stage of shadow work is the most radical, transcending the binary of good and evil entirely. When you've owned your shadow deeply enough, you stop dividing the world into good people and bad people. You recognize that everyone contains both. You stop being shocked by human cruelty because you know you're capable of the same cruelty. You stop being self-righteous because you've seen your own unrighteousness clearly. This doesn't make you cynical. It makes you compassionate, real compassion. Not the condescending pity kind, but the deep recognition that we're all carrying the same human capacity for both love and harm, both creation and destruction. You look at the person who hurt you, and instead of seeing a monster, you see a human being acting out their unconscious shadow, just as you've acted out yours. You can hold them accountable without hating them. You can protect yourself from them without demonizing them. And you look at yourself with the same complex compassion, not excusing your darkness, but not annihilating yourself for it either, just recognizing, I am human. I contain multitudes. I am capable of profound love and profound harm. And consciousness is what lets me choose which capacity I actualize. Jung said, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. This is the moral effort. This is the work that most people refuse, but it's also the work that sets you free. The warning, shadow bypass. I need to give you a critical warning before we move forward. Shadow work can be bypassed, distorted, and weaponized. Some people use shadow work to avoid accountability. I'm just owning my shadow becomes an excuse for harmful behavior. This is not shadow work. This is shadow performance. Others use it to create a false equivalence. Everyone has a shadow, so my abuse is no worse than anyone else's. This is not shadow integration. This is moral relativism used to avoid responsibility. Real shadow work makes you more accountable, not less. It makes you more aware of your impact, not more dismissive of it. It makes you choose differently going forward, not excuse past harm. If someone hurt you and they're using shadow language to avoid accountability, that's not shadow integration. That's manipulation. Don't confuse the two, and if you're using shadow work to beat yourself up, to confirm your unworthiness, to prove you're fundamentally bad, that's not integration either. That's shadow inflation, making your darkness more important than it is. Real shadow work is neither excuse nor condemnation. It's recognition, ownership, and integration. It's seeing your capacity for darkness clearly, taking responsibility for when you've actualized that capacity, and choosing consciousness going forward. The invitation. So I'm asking you to do something uncomfortable. I'm asking you to look at the pain you're carrying and ask not just, what did they do to me, but what does this reveal about me? If someone betrayed you, have you ever betrayed anyone? If someone abandoned you, have you ever abandoned anyone? If someone was selfish, have you ever chosen yourself over others' well-being? If someone was cruel, have you ever been cruel? If someone lied, have you ever lied? If someone manipulated, have you ever manipulated? Don't let yourself off easy. Don't hide behind, but mine was different, or but I had reasons, or but mine wasn't as bad. Go to the essential act. Strip away context and justification. Look at the bare truth. Have you done to others what's been done to you? This question is a doorway, and walking through it is voluntary. You can stay in victim consciousness, projecting your shadow onto others, remaining unconscious. Many people do. Most people do. But if you walk through, if you're willing to own your shadow, to see your darkness clearly, to recognize yourself in the people who've hurt you, something transforms. The pain stops being about them and becomes about you. And when it's about you, you have power over it. You can integrate it, learn from it, choose differently. The universe gave you this pain to wake you up to your shadow, to force you to see what you've been denying, to break through your defenses and show you that you're not innocent, you're whole, which includes being capable of everything you judge. This is the hardest awakening, but it's also the most liberating, because on the other side of shadow recognition, you're free. Free from projection, free from unconscious repetition, free from the exhausting performance of innocence. You become someone who knows their darkness and therefore isn't controlled by it. Someone who can see their shadow impulses and choose not to act on them. Someone who's truly responsible because they're truly conscious. Jung spent his life trying to get people to see this. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well. But one must learn to know oneself in order to know who one is. The shadow is the narrow door. The pain you're in is that tight passage, and on the other side is knowledge of who you actually are. not the innocent persona, not the morally superior ego, but the complete, complex, dark and light totality of your human being. Walk through, own your darkness, meet your shadow, not because it's comfortable, but because it's true. And truth is the only foundation for real transformation. You are capable of everything you judge. And knowing that, really knowing it, is what makes you free. There's a particular kind of death that happens while you're still alive. It's not the death of your body. It's not even the death of your true self. It's the death of your false self, the persona, the mask, the performance you've been giving for so long that you forgot you were performing. This death is excruciating because unlike physical death, you have to stay alive to witness it. You have to feel the mask crack and fall away piece by piece. You have to endure everyone who loved the mask grieving its loss. You have to face the terrifying question underneath. If I'm not who I've been pretending to be, then who am I? Persona death is one of the most common forms of awakening pain, and one of the least understood. People experience it as breakdown, failure, or loss of identity. They don't recognize it as what it actually is, the necessary death of a lie you've been living. Let me tell you about Elena. Elena was 32 years old and had spent the last decade being the perfect person. She was an elementary school teacher, beloved, patient, endlessly kind. She was the friend everyone called in crisis, the daughter who never disappointed her parents, the volunteer who showed up for every cause, the person who always said yes, always helped, always put others first. Everyone loved Elena. Teachers at her school adored her. Parents fought to get their kids in her class. Her friends relied on her completely. Her family was proud of her. She had a reputation for being genuinely good, not just nice, but good, selfless, caring, the kind of person who restored your faith in humanity. Elena loved being loved. She'd built her entire identity around being needed, being helpful, being the person who made everything better for everyone else. When people praised her kindness, she felt validated. When people depended on her, she felt purposeful. Her self-worth was completely entangled with her performance of goodness. And then she burned out, completely catastrophically burned out. It started with exhaustion that wouldn't lift, then resentment she couldn't suppress, sudden, shocking bitterness toward the people she was helping, then a breakdown during a staff meeting where she found herself saying, to her own horror, "I don't care. I don't care about any of this. I can't pretend to care anymore." She took medical leave. Depression, the doctor said. Burnout. She spent weeks in bed, unable to work, unable to perform the version of herself everyone expected. And in that enforced stillness, something emerged that terrified her. She didn't just resent helping people. She didn't even like helping people. She'd been performing kindness while harboring secret contempt. She'd been playing the role of selfless giver while feeling empty, exploited, and resentful underneath. The real Elena, the one beneath the mask, wasn't particularly nice. She was judgmental. She was selfish. She had needs she'd never expressed and desires she'd never prioritized. She was angry about years of saying yes when she meant no. She was exhausted from decades of performing a personality that wasn't hers. But acknowledging this felt like destroying herself. Because if Elena wasn't the nice, helpful, selfless teacher, if that was just performance, then who was she? If the person everyone loved wasn't real, then was she even lovable at all? This is persona death. This is the pain of the mask shattering and having to face what's underneath. The persona, your social mask. Jung developed the concept of the persona to describe the social face we show the world, the adaptive personality we construct to navigate social demands and gain acceptance. The word persona comes from ancient Greek theater, where it meant the mask worn by actors. The mask had two functions. It showed the audience who the character was supposed to be, and it amplified the actor's voice, so they could be heard. Your persona does the same thing. It shows others who you're supposed to be according to social roles and expectations, and it amplifies certain parts of you while muting others so you can be accepted, successful, loved. Everyone needs a persona. It's not inherently bad. You need different faces for different contexts. A professional face for work, a parental face for your children, a social face for friends. These aren't lies. They're context-appropriate expressions of different aspects of yourself. The problem comes when you stop wearing the persona and start being the persona. When you forget there's anyone underneath the mask. When the performance becomes so total that you lose access to your authentic self entirely. This is what happened to Elena. She didn't consciously choose to be the endlessly kind teacher. She adapted to what got rewarded. As a child, she learned that being helpful made her parents happy. Being nice made her popular. Taking care of others gave her purpose and protection from criticism. So she developed a persona of selfless kindness, and she wore it so consistently for so long that she forgot she was wearing it. The persona worked for years. It got her love, approval, purpose, identity, but it came at enormous cost. She had no idea who she actually was underneath it, and eventually the person underneath couldn't breathe anymore. The 4 symptoms of persona. Over-identification. How do you know if you're living as your persona rather than just using your persona? Here are the signs. 1. Exhaustion from being yourself. If being yourself feels like work, like a performance you have to maintain, you're identified with persona. Authentic selfhood shouldn't be exhausting. It should be relieving. If you feel tired from the effort of being who you are, it's because you're not actually being who you are. You're performing who you're supposed to be. Elena was perpetually exhausted. She thought it was from the demands of teaching and helping others, but actually it was from the constant energy required to suppress her real responses and perform her kind persona. Every time she said yes when she felt no, every time she smiled when she felt annoyed, every time she helped when she wanted to refuse. That took energy. The performance itself was depleting her. 2. Different selves in different contexts. If you're dramatically different with different groups, one personality at work, another with family, another with friends, and none of them feel fully real, you're wearing different personas without access to a core self underneath. Everyone modulates somewhat based on context. But if the modulation is so extreme that you almost don't recognize yourself, from context to context, you've fragmented into multiple personas with no center. You've become a collection of masks with no face underneath. Elena was kind, helpful teacher Elena at school, dutiful, good daughter Elena with her parents, available, caring friend Elena in her social life. But if you asked her who Elena actually was, separate from those roles, she couldn't tell you. The roles were all she knew. 3. Fear of letting people down. If your primary fear is disappointing others, if you're terrified of what people will think, if you stop meeting their expectations, you're more committed to persona than to self. Your sense of worth is coming entirely from external validation of the performance. Elena couldn't say no because saying no would mean people seeing her as selfish, difficult, disappointing. Her worth depended on being the person others needed her to be. The thought of letting someone down felt like annihilation because without the approval, she had no sense of inherent value. 4. Confusion about your own preferences. If someone asks what you want and you genuinely don't know, if you've spent so long accommodating others that you've lost touch with your own desires, needs, preferences, you've sacrificed self to persona. When Elena's therapist asked her what she actually wanted, not what she thought she should want, but what she genuinely desired, she couldn't answer. She knew what her students needed, what her friends needed, what her parents expected, but what Elena wanted, she had no idea. That part of her had been silenced so long she couldn't hear it anymore. The moment of shattering persona. Death doesn't happen gradually. It happens suddenly, catastrophically. You can maintain the mask for years, decades, and then one day, often during stress, crisis, or exhaustion, it cracks. And once it starts cracking, it shatters. For Elena, it was that moment in the staff meeting when she couldn't maintain the performance anymore. The mask just fell away, and what came out was raw, unfiltered truth. I don't care. For others, it's different triggers. A burnout that makes the performance impossible. A crisis that reveals the mask's inadequacy. A confrontation where someone sees through the act and forces you to face it. A moment of exhaustion where you just can't pretend anymore. The shattering is terrifying because suddenly you're exposed. The mask is gone and you have no idea what's underneath. You're naked in front of everyone who only knew the masked version, and you don't know if there's anything lovable beneath the performance. The grief. No one understands. Here's what makes persona death so isolating. Nobody understands why you're grieving. From the outside, it looks like you're just changing. Maybe you're setting boundaries. Maybe you're prioritizing yourself. Maybe you're being more authentic. People might even celebrate it. Good for you for finally putting yourself first. But inside, you're dying. You're grieving the death of someone who never existed, but who everyone loved. You're mourning the loss of an identity that was false but felt real. You're experiencing a profound disorientation because you've lost the only version of yourself you've ever known, even though that version was a lie. Elena describes the months after her breakdown as mourning a ghost. She was grieving the loss of nice Elena, helpful Elena, teacher. Everyone loved Elena. That person was dead. And even though she knew intellectually that person was never real, emotionally it felt like losing herself. And the hardest part, everyone who loved the old Elena was confused, hurt, or angry. Her friends felt abandoned when she stopped being endlessly available. Her family felt disappointed when she stopped being endlessly accommodating. Her colleagues felt betrayed when she set boundaries. They weren't wrong to feel those things. They'd lost someone they loved. But what they'd loved was a mask. And Elena had to choose between continuing the performance to keep their love or killing the mask to find herself. The archaeological excavation, finding the person under the persona. Once the mask shatters, you face the terrifying question, who am I actually? This requires what I call persona archaeology, excavating your true self from beneath layers of performance and adaptation. It's painstaking work. You have to dig through years of conditioning, expectation, and accommodation to find authentic preferences, genuine feelings, real desires. Here's the process. 1. Identify what you perform versus what you feel. Start noticing the gap between your external behavior and internal experience. When you say yes, do you feel yes? When you smile, are you actually happy? When you help, do you actually want to? Elena began tracking this. She'd say yes to helping a colleague and notice the resentment that arose immediately after. She'd perform enthusiasm about a social event while feeling dread. The gap between performance and feeling showed her where the mask was operating. 2. Recognize who benefits from your persona. Your persona exists because it served you. It got you love, acceptance, safety, but it also served others. It made you convenient, manageable, useful. Ask, who benefits from me being this way? What would I lose if I stopped performing? Elena realized her nice person persona was incredibly convenient for others. They got someone who never said no, never made waves, never required anything. Her family got the easy daughter. Her friends got the reliable one, her. Students got the patient teacher. Everyone benefited from Elena's mask except Elena. 3. Recover suppressed responses. Your authentic self is often found in the responses you've been suppressing, the anger you don't let yourself feel, the no you don't let yourself say, the selfishness you don't let yourself express, the judgment you don't let yourself voice. Elena started a private journal where she wrote her unperformed responses. When someone asked her to help, she'd write what she actually felt. No, I'm tired. Ask someone else. When someone praised her kindness, she'd write the truth. I resent you for only seeing me this way. She wasn't acting on these responses yet. She was just recovering them, giving them space to exist. 4. Experiment with small authenticity. Once you've identified the gap between mask and self, start experimenting with small acts of authenticity. Say no to something minor. Express a preference you'd usually hide. Let someone see your annoyance instead of performing pleasantness. These experiments are terrifying because you're convinced that without the mask you'll be rejected. But what you discover is more nuanced. Some people do reject the authentic you, but others appreciate it. And more importantly, you start to experience the relief of not performing. Elena started small. She said no to a colleague's request without elaborate justification. She told a friend she was too tired to talk instead of forcing herself to be available. She let her students see her frustration instead of always being patient. Some relationships strained, but others deepened, and Elena started feeling less exhausted. 5. Tolerate other people's disappointment. This is the hardest part. When you stop being your persona, people who loved that version of you will be disappointed. They'll express it. They'll try to pull you back into the old performance. They'll guilt you, manipulate you, or withdraw affection. You have to tolerate this. You have to let them be disappointed. You have to prioritize your authenticity over their comfort. This feels cruel. It feels selfish. But it's the only way through. Elena lost friendships during her persona death. People who only wanted nice Elena couldn't handle authentic Elena. Her family was confused and hurt when she stopped accommodating their every need. Some students preferred the old teacher who never showed frustration. She had to grieve those losses while recognizing they were necessary. The relationships built on her mask weren't real relationships. They were contracts where she performed and others benefited. Real relationships could only form with her authentic self. The liberation, the pain of persona. Death is temporary. The pain of performance is permanent. Here's what makes persona death worth enduring. The pain of losing your false self is intense but temporary. The pain of maintaining your false self is duller but permanent. If you continue performing your persona, you'll spend your entire life exhausted, resentful, disconnected from yourself, wondering why you feel so empty despite doing everything right. That pain never ends. It just becomes your baseline. But if you let the persona die, if you endure the terror, the grief, the social consequences, the uncertainty, on the other side is something extraordinary. You get to be yourself. Actually yourself, not a performance of yourself. And being yourself, even when it's messy and imperfect and sometimes disappointing to others, is less exhausting than performing someone you're not. Elena is 3 years out from her breakdown now. She's a different person. Or rather, she's actually a person instead of a collection of performances. She teaches part-time instead of full-time. She has fewer friends, but deeper friendships. Her family is still adjusting to daughter who says, "No, Elena," but the relationship is becoming more honest. And she's not exhausted anymore. She's not performing constant kindness. She's sometimes kind and sometimes not. She's sometimes helpful and sometimes selfish. She's fully human instead of falsely perfect. She told me, "I miss being loved the way everyone loved old Elena. That was a different kind of love, easier, simpler, more abundant. But I couldn't keep performing to get it. And what I have now, The people who love messy, real, imperfect me, that's worth more. That's actually love. The other thing was applause for a performance. The timing. Why persona death happens when it does. So why does the persona shatter when it does? Why can some people maintain the performance for decades while others crack in their 20s? Persona death happens when the cost of the performance finally exceeds the benefit, when maintaining the mask requires more energy than you have, when the gap between your authentic self and your performed self becomes too wide to bridge, when the part of you that's been silenced gets loud enough to crack the facade. The timing is precise. You maintain the persona as long as it's serving you more than costing you. But there's always a threshold, a point where the cost becomes unbearable. And that's when it shatters. For Elena, it took 32 years and full burnout. For others, it happens younger. Maybe a crisis in their 20s forces them to confront the performance early. For some, it never happens. They die having lived their whole life as their persona, never knowing who they actually were underneath. But if it's happening to you now, if your mask is cracking, if you're losing your performed identity, if you're facing the terror of not knowing who you are, it means you've reached the threshold. It means the authentic self underneath can no longer tolerate the suffocation of the mask. It means something in you is demanding to be real. Even if being real costs you everything, the performance was getting you. The universe gives you persona death when it's time to stop lying. When you've finally developed enough inner strength to tolerate the social consequences of authenticity. When you're ready to discover who you actually are beneath who you've been pretending to be. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But becoming who you truly are requires killing who you've been pretending to be. It requires letting the mask die, grieving its death, tolerating everyone's disappointment, and living through the terrifying uncertainty of not knowing who's underneath. This is the pain of persona death, and it's one of the most important awakenings you'll ever experience, because on the other side of it, you get something most people never get, a real life, lived by your real self, not a performed life, lived by a mask. Everyone loved who you pretended to be. Now you have to find out if anyone will love who you actually are. That's terrifying. But it's also the only way to know if you're loved. Really loved, not just applauded for your performance. The mask is dying, let it die, and see who you are underneath. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that's different from other loss. It's not just that someone left. It's that when they left, they took part of you with them. A part you didn't know you'd given them, a part you can't access anymore now that they're gone. And you're left feeling incomplete, like half of yourself walked out the door. This isn't metaphor. This is the literal psychological mechanism Jung called projection, specifically projection of the anima or animus. And the pain of this kind of heartbreak isn't just grief. It's an awakening to the parts of yourself you've been experiencing through someone else and now must learn to embody yourself. Let me tell you about Michael. Michael was 43 years old when his wife filed for divorce. They'd been married for 15 years. It wasn't a dramatic ending, no infidelity, no abuse, no catastrophe, just slow erosion. They'd grown apart, become strangers, were maintaining a structure that no longer housed genuine connection. Michael understood this intellectually. He even agreed the marriage should end. But when she actually left, when she moved out and the divorce became real, he fell apart in a way that confused him. He wasn't just sad. He was disintegrated. He couldn't access his emotions. He felt numb, disconnected, like half his soul had been surgically removed. He'd lost the ability to feel things deeply, to be vulnerable, to cry, to express tenderness. All of that had somehow left with her. In therapy, his therapist asked him, What did your wife carry for you that you can't access on your own? Michael didn't understand the question at first, but as he sat with it, a disturbing recognition emerged. His wife had been his emotional translator. She felt things deeply while he stayed logical. She expressed vulnerability while he stayed strong. She accessed intuition while he relied on analysis. She created beauty and meaning while he focused on practical concerns. He'd thought they were complementary, a good partnership. She handled the emotional realm. He handled the practical realm. They balanced each other. But what he was discovering now in her absence was more unsettling. He hadn't been balanced. He'd been fragmented. He'd outsourced his own emotional depth, his own intuition, his own capacity for feeling to her. And when she left, she took those parts of him with her because he'd never learned to access them himself. This is anima projection, and the pain of its withdrawal is one of the most profound forms of awakening the psyche can deliver. The anima and animus, your inner opposite. Jung observed something that contradicts our modern understanding of gender. Every human being carries both masculine and feminine psychological principles within them, regardless of their biological sex or gender identity. He called the unconscious feminine in men the anima and the unconscious masculine in women the animus. These aren't about stereotypes or social roles. They're about fundamental psychological oppositions, consciousness and unconsciousness, logos and eros, thinking and feeling, doing and being, structure and flow. Every psyche contains both poles, but one is typically more developed and conscious, while the other remains undeveloped and unconscious. Men, Jung observed, typically develop their conscious masculine, rational, structured, controlled, outward focused, while their feminine remains unconscious. This unconscious feminine, the anima, carries their capacity for emotional depth, intuition, receptivity, inner life, and connection to the soul. Women typically develop their conscious feminine, relational, intuitive, receptive, emotionally attuned, while their masculine remains unconscious. This unconscious masculine, the animus, carries their capacity for assertion, logic, structure, independence, and connection to power. These are generalizations, and individuals vary enormously, but the pattern Jung identified is real. We develop one side of the psyche consciously, while the opposite remains in shadow, projected onto others. Projection, seeking yourself in another. When you haven't integrated your anima or animus, when those qualities remain unconscious, you project them onto others. You seek them out there instead of finding them in here. Men project their anima onto women. They're drawn to women who embody the emotional depth, intuitive knowing, and soulful connection they can't access in themselves. They fall in love with women who feel things deeply, who create beauty, who understand the unspoken, who seem to have direct access to meaning and mystery. Women project their animus onto men. They're drawn to men who embody the strength, clarity, decisiveness, and power they haven't claimed in themselves. They're attracted to men who know what they want, who take action, who provide structure, who seem confident and self-directed. The projection creates intense attraction. You're not just attracted to the person, you're attracted to the part of yourself they're carrying. You feel completed by them because they're providing access to psychological territory you can't reach on your own. This is what Michael experienced with his wife. He felt complete with her because she was living the emotional, intuitive, feeling dimensions of life that he'd never developed. When he was with her, he felt whole because she was carrying his anima. Through her, he could access tears, tenderness, vulnerability, depth. Without her, those capacities disappeared. The mechanism, using relationship to avoid integration. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We use relationships to avoid internal work. Instead of developing our own inner opposite, Instead of doing the difficult work of integrating anima or animus, we find someone who already embodies those qualities and use them as a prosthetic. We plug into their capacities instead of developing our own. This creates what looks like perfect complementarity: masculine energy partner and feminine energy partner, thinker and feeler, doer and beer, provider and nurturer. It looks balanced. It looks like partnership. But it's actually fragmentation. It's two half people creating an illusion of wholeness through merger. Each person is unconscious of their own capacity for their opposite, so they need the other person to complete them. The relationship becomes codependent, not in the pop psychology sense of unhealthy attachment, but in the Jungian sense of psychological dependence. You literally need the other person to access parts of yourself. Without them, you're incomplete. Michael needed his wife to feel. Without her, he was emotionally numb. She needed him to be strong. Without him, she felt directionless and powerless. They weren't two whole people choosing partnership. They were two fragments creating temporary wholeness through projection. When relationships end, the forced withdrawal of projection. As long as the relationship continues, the projection can stay in place. You can continue accessing your anima or animus through the other person. You can maintain the illusion that you're complete together while remaining fragmented individually. But when the relationship ends, through death, divorce, betrayal, or abandonment, the projection is forcibly withdrawn. The other person takes your anima or animus with them, and suddenly you can't access those qualities anymore. This is why heartbreak from anima-animus loss feels so catastrophic. It's not just losing a person, it's losing access to parts of yourself you've been experiencing through them. Men who lose their anima carrier often describe feeling dead inside, numb, cut off from emotion, meaning, depth, like someone turned off their capacity to feel, because in a sense, someone did. The woman who was carrying their feeling function is gone, and they never developed it themselves. Women who lose their animus carrier often describe feeling powerless, directionless, unable to act, like they've lost their spine, their will, their agency, because the man who was carrying their power function is gone, and they never claimed it themselves. The pain as initiation, the inner marriage. But here's where this becomes awakening rather than just loss. The pain of losing your anima or animus carrier is the psyche forcing you to develop those qualities yourself. The universe uses relationship loss to initiate the inner marriage, the integration of your opposite. It says, you've been using this person to access parts of yourself. Now you must develop those parts directly. You must become internally what you've been seeking externally. Michael's grief over his divorce was the beginning of this process. In the first 6 months, he just felt numb and broken. But gradually, with therapy and inner work, something began shifting. He started having dreams about women. Not romantic dreams, but dreams where feminine figures were teaching him, guiding him, showing him things about himself. Jung would recognize these as anima dreams, the unconscious feminine beginning to communicate with consciousness. He started feeling emotions more directly, not through a woman translating for him, but his own grief, his own tenderness, his own vulnerability emerging. It was uncomfortable. He didn't know how to hold these feelings. But they were his, not mediated through someone else. He discovered he could access intuition, small knowings that didn't come from logic, gut feelings about people and situations, a sense of something beneath the surface that his analytical mind couldn't grasp, but his deeper self understood. He began creating beauty in his environment. He'd always dismissed this as woman stuff. His wife decorated, he just lived in whatever space she created. But now, alone, he found himself caring about aesthetics, arrangement, the feeling of a space. He was discovering his own relationship to beauty, These weren't large transformations, they were subtle shifts, but together they represented something profound. Michael was integrating his anima. He was developing internally what he'd been seeking externally. He was becoming whole instead of remaining fragmented. 3 years after his divorce, Michael told me something extraordinary. "I'm grateful my wife left. Not because the marriage was bad, it was fine, but because as long as we were together, I'd never have discovered these parts of myself. I'd have spent my whole life emotionally dependent on a woman to access my own depth. Now I can feel on my own, cry on my own, access meaning on my own. I'm complete now in a way I wasn't before. I don't need someone to carry my anima anymore. If I partner again, it will be from wholeness, not from need." The anima-animus integration practice. So how do you do this work? How do you integrate your unconscious opposite and stop projecting it onto others? For men, integrating the anima. 1. Recognize what you've been projecting. Look at the women you've been most attracted to. What qualities did they embody that you don't embody? Emotional depth, intuition, sensitivity, creativity, connection to beauty, spiritual awareness. These aren't qualities they have that you don't. These are qualities you have but haven't developed. You projected them onto women because you couldn't access them in yourself. 2. Develop your feeling function. Men often substitute thinking for feeling. Asked how they feel, they tell you what they think. The integration requires learning to actually feel, to sit with emotions without analyzing them, to let tears come without understanding why, to tolerate vulnerability without fixing it. Michael started a practice of just sitting with whatever he was feeling without trying to solve it or understand it. If sadness arose, he let it be there. If tenderness emerged, he didn't rationalize it away. This was excruciating at first. His masculine impulse was to analyze and resolve. But gradually, he developed the capacity to just feel. 3. Listen to dreams and intuition. The anima speaks through dreams, symbols, gut feelings, and irrational knowings. Men integrated with their anima pay attention to these. They don't dismiss feelings as illogical. They investigate them as information. Start recording dreams. Notice synchronicities. Pay attention when something feels off, even though logically it seems fine. The anima is trying to communicate. Your job is to learn her language. 4. Create beauty and meaning. The anima is your connection to soul, to meaning, to the aesthetic dimension of life. Integrated men don't dismiss these as frivolous. They cultivate them. Create something beautiful, write, make music, arrange your space with care. Engage with art not just intellectually, but feelingly. 5. Develop your inner feminine relationships. In Jungian work, men learn to have an ongoing dialogue with their anima, treating her as an inner figure they can talk to, learn from, be guided by. This isn't psychosis, it's active imagination, a method of engaging the unconscious. When faced with a decision, Michael started asking internally, what does she think? Where she was his anima, his inner feminine wisdom. At first, it felt artificial, but gradually he started receiving responses, intuitive knowings that didn't come from his logical mind. For women, integrating the animus. 1. Recognize what you've been projecting. Look at the men you've been most attracted to. What qualities did they embody that you don't embody? Strength, clarity, decisiveness, independence, intellectual power, authority. These aren't qualities only men have. These are qualities in you that remain unconscious, projected onto men because you haven't claimed them. 2. Develop your thinking function. Women often substitute feeling for thinking. Asked what they think, they tell you how they feel. Integration requires developing clear thinking, being able to analyze situations, objectively make decisions based on logic, not just emotion. Have opinions that aren't dependent on others' approval. This doesn't mean becoming cold or unfeeling. It means adding thinking to feeling, becoming both rather than only one. 3. Claim your power and agency. The animus carries power, the capacity to take action, make decisions, assert boundaries, stand in authority. Women integrated with their animus don't wait for permission or approval. They know what they want and they claim it. Practice saying no without elaborate justification. Make decisions without consensus. Take action even when you don't feel confident. Let yourself be powerful, directive, assertive. 4. Develop your voice and opinions. The animus is the voice of inner authority. Integrated women can articulate clear thoughts, hold firm positions, disagree without fear of rejection. They have intellectual confidence. Practice having opinions. Write them down. Argue a position. Let yourself be wrong without collapsing. Develop your own thinking instead of just reflecting others' thoughts. 5. Become your own father. Many women project their animus onto father figures, literally their fathers, or metaphorically any man who provides structure, protection, guidance. Integration means becoming your own father, providing yourself the structure, protection, and guidance you've been seeking from men. The pattern, relationship pain as timing device. So when does animus awakening happen? Why does this pain arrive when it does? Jung observed that this integration typically happens in the second half of life, after you've lived out your primary gender identification in the first half. Young men need to establish their masculine identity. Only later can they afford to integrate their feminine. Young women need to establish their feminine identity. Only later can they afford to integrate their masculine. But specific relationship losses can trigger the integration earlier. Heartbreak becomes the catalyst. Loss becomes the teacher. The pain forces you to withdraw projections and do the internal work you've been avoiding. The timing is precise. The relationship ends when you're ready to integrate your opposite, but still using another person to access it. The universe gives you this pain when external relationship can no longer serve as substitute for internal wholeness. If the relationship ended earlier, you'd just find another person to carry your projection. You'd repeat the pattern with a different partner. But when it ends at the right moment, you've developed enough self-awareness to recognize the pattern and choose differently. Michael could have found another woman to carry his anima after his divorce. Many men do. They immediately enter a new relationship with a woman who embodies the same qualities, continuing the projection with a different person. But Michael was ready for something different. The pain of the divorce forced him to ask, why do I keep outsourcing my emotional life to women? What am I avoiding by doing this? That question led to integration work, and that work led to wholeness. The warning, false integration. I need to give you a warning. Some people think they're integrating their anima or animus when actually they're just performing it. Men who get in touch with their feelings by becoming emotionally reactive aren't integrated, they're just undisciplined. Real anima integration makes men more emotionally sophisticated, not more emotionally chaotic. Women who claim their power by becoming aggressive and domineering aren't integrated, they're just inflated. Real animus integration makes women more clear and strong, not more harsh and tyrannical. Integration isn't switching from one extreme to the other. It's not men becoming feminine or women becoming masculine. It's both genders becoming whole, able to access both poles as needed without losing their primary orientation. Michael didn't become less masculine through his anima integration. He became more fully masculine that included rather than excluded emotional depth, intuitive knowing, and soulful connection. He was still a man, just a more complete man. The inner marriage, union of opposites. The final stage of anima-animus integration is what Jung called the inner marriage, or hieros gamos. the sacred union of opposites within yourself. You're no longer seeking completion through relationship. You're complete within yourself. Masculine and feminine, thinking and feeling, logos and eros, all integrated into a unified whole. This doesn't mean you don't need relationships. It means your relationships become different. Instead of needing someone to complete you, you choose someone to share your completeness with. Instead of unconscious projection and codependency, you have conscious partnership between two whole people. Michael's next relationship, which began 4 years after his divorce, was completely different from his marriage. He didn't need his new partner to carry his emotions. He could access them himself. He didn't depend on her for intuitive guidance. He'd developed his own. The relationship was a choice, not a need. A collaboration between two complete people, not a merger of two fragments. Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But the transformation only works between two whole substances. If you're fragmented, projecting, using the other person to access parts of yourself, the meeting isn't chemical transformation, it's codependent fragmentation. The universe gives you heartbreak to force wholeness. It gives you the pain of losing your anima or animus carrier, so you'll finally develop those qualities yourself. It gives you this particular form of suffering when it's time to stop seeking yourself in others and start finding yourself within. This is one of the most profound awakenings, discovering that the person you thought you couldn't live without was actually carrying parts of you that you couldn't live without. And now, in their absence, you must become those parts. The pain is the initiation. The loss is the teacher. The heartbreak is the doorway to internal wholeness. And on the other side, when you've integrated your opposite, when you've married yourself internally, you're free. Free from needing someone to complete you. Free from projecting your own capacities onto others. Free to love from wholeness rather than from need. This is the awakening that relationship pain makes possible. You don't need another person to be whole. You are whole. And the heartbreak that's destroying you right now is actually teaching you that. Let it teach. Let it break you open. Let it force you to find in yourself what you've been seeking in others. The inner marriage awaits, and you've been preparing for it longer than you know. There's a kind of pain that doesn't come from any specific loss. Your health is fine. Your relationships are intact. Your career is stable. Nothing objectively bad has happened, and yet you're drowning in a terror so profound it makes ordinary suffering look merciful. This is existential pain, the confrontation with the void, the sudden, overwhelming awareness that you will die, that nothing ultimately matters, that all meaning is constructed, that existence itself is absurd. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. This is perhaps the deepest pain the psyche can deliver, because it's not about losing something. It's about recognizing that everything you thought was solid is built on nothing. Let me tell you about Thomas. Thomas was 47 years old when it hit him. Successful businessman, happy marriage, healthy kids, financial security, everything he'd worked for, achieved. He was living the dream, his dream, genuinely, not just someone else's script. And then one afternoon, sitting in his office reviewing quarterly reports, something shifted. It wasn't a thought, it was a visceral realization that bypassed his thinking mind entirely and landed in his body like a physical blow. I'm going to die. This body, this consciousness, this me, it will cease to exist. Permanently, absolutely. And everything I'm doing, this work, this achievement, this whole life I've built, means nothing in the face of that. The panic was immediate and total. His heart raced, his breath shortened. The walls of his office seemed to close in. He felt like he was falling through the floor of reality itself. with nothing to catch him. He went home early, told his wife he wasn't feeling well. But it wasn't illness, it was ontological terror. The awareness that had cracked open wouldn't close. Every time he tried to focus on normal things, dinner, conversation, the news, the void would rush back in. What's the point? Why does any of this matter? We're all going to die. Everything we do is ultimately meaningless. Over the following weeks, it got worse. The panic attacks became frequent. Depression set in, not the kind that comes from loss, but the kind that comes from meaninglessness. Thomas couldn't find motivation for anything because he couldn't stop seeing through the illusion of meaning to the emptiness beneath. His therapist diagnosed him with existential crisis. His doctor prescribed anti-anxiety medication, but Thomas knew instinctively that this wasn't a disorder to be medicated away. This was something else, something more fundamental, something that medication might suppress but wouldn't actually address. He was having what philosophers call awakening to being toward death, what mystics call the dark night of the soul, what Jung called confrontation with the reality of the psyche's own mortality. This wasn't pathology. This was awakening, terrifying, disorienting, potentially psychologically dangerous awakening, but awakening nonetheless. The existential questions that won't stop existential pain arrives in the form of questions that won't stop asking themselves, why am I here? What's the point of any of this? I'm going to die, so what does anything matter? Is this all there is? What if nothing means anything? What if there's no God, no cosmic purpose, no grand plan, just random existence ending in oblivion? These aren't intellectual curiosities. When they hit at the existential level, they're body-level terrors. They create anxiety so profound it can be paralyzing, depression so deep it can feel like drowning, a sense of alienation from ordinary life so extreme that nothing feels real anymore. Thomas described it as living behind glass. He could go through the motions, go to work, have conversations, maintain his routines, but he felt separated from it all by an invisible barrier. Nothing touched him, nothing mattered. He was going through the motions of a life that felt completely empty of meaning. We spend our lives building fortresses of comfort. Brick by careful brick, we construct walls against the unknown, against the uncomfortable, against the whisper of something deeper, calling from beneath the floorboards of our carefully curated existence. We fill our days with noise, the hum of screens, the chatter of obligations, the endless loop of distraction that keeps us moving, always moving, so we never have to stop and feel what lives in the silence. We become architects of our own anesthesia, designing lives that look like living but feel like sleep. This is the ego's great accomplishment, the creation of a persona so convincing that even we believe it. We wake each morning and put on the costume of who we think we should be, the successful one, the strong one, the one who has it all together. We perform this role with such dedication that somewhere along the way, we forget there was ever an authentic self beneath the performance. The mask grows roots. It merges with skin. And in that merger, something vital goes silent, descends into the basement of our being and waits. Jung understood this descent intimately. He knew that everything we refuse to face, every emotion we deny, every truth we cannot bear to speak, every unlived possibility we abandon, all of it accumulates in the shadow, that dark twin of consciousness that grows stronger the more we ignore it. The shadow is not evil. It is simply real. It is the repository of all that we are but cannot yet admit. And it has the patience of stone, the persistence of water wearing down rock. It will wait years, decades even, for its moment of recognition. But here is what most do not understand. The psyche is not content to let us sleep forever. Consciousness is the soul's deepest hunger, the self's most fundamental drive. The universe within us, that vast, intelligent force Jung called the self, will not allow us to waste our existence in comfortable unconsciousness. It loves us too fiercely for that. And when our defenses become impenetrable, when our denial reaches a critical mass, when the gap between who we are and who we pretend to be grows too wide, that is when pain arrives. Not as punishment, never as punishment. Pain comes as the only language that can penetrate the fortress we have built. It is the alarm bell ringing through the darkened house of the psyche. It is the earthquake that cracks the foundation of our false peace. It is the universe's most intimate whisper, delivered at the volume necessary to finally be heard. Think of it. When have you truly changed without suffering? When has transformation arrived, gently, politely waiting for an invitation? The ancient mystery traditions knew what we have forgotten, that consciousness requires a price. The shamans spoke of the initiatory illness, the wound that marks the healer. The alchemists described putrefactio, the necessary rotting away of the old form before the new can emerge. The mystics wandered into their dark nights of the soul, descending into an abyss where all certainty dissolves. Every wisdom tradition that has probed the depths of human transformation has discovered the same terrible truth: awakening hurts. This is because pain alone has the power to stop us, not slow us, stop us completely. When suffering becomes unavoidable, when loss breaks us open, when illness pins us to the bed, when grief tears through the carefully constructed narrative of our lives, in those moments we cannot perform, we cannot distract, we cannot rationalize our way to safety. The persona crumbles, the defenses fail, and suddenly we are face to face with what we have been running from all along, ourselves. In all our broken, beautiful, terrifying authenticity, the universe calibrates this pain with exquisite precision. It is not random, it is not cosmic cruelty. It arrives at exactly the frequency needed to shatter the particular illusion you have mistaken for life. For some, it is the slow ache of a life lived for others' approval, a suffering so normalized it masquerades as virtue, until one day you wake up and do not recognize the person in the mirror. For others, it is sudden, the death of someone irreplaceable, the diagnosis that reorders every priority, the betrayal that reveals how little you truly knew yourself or another. The form varies, but the function remains constant. Pain breaks through where nothing else can reach. Jung himself walked this path. His own confrontation with the unconscious nearly destroyed him, visions and voices rising from depths he could barely comprehend, the ground of his sanity seeming to give way beneath him. He descended into what he would later call his creative illness, a journey into the underworld of his own psyche that lasted years. But from that descent came everything that mattered: his understanding of archetypes, his mapping of the collective unconscious, his profound insights into the nature of the self. His breakdown became his breakthrough, but only because he had the courage to listen to what his pain was trying to teach him. This is the numinous rupture, the moment when the sacred crashes through the mundane like lightning through a church roof. The comfortable, comprehensible world we have built cannot contain the totality of what we are. Something larger, deeper, more real than our ego's neat little kingdom insists on being known. And when it arrives, it does not knock politely. It breaks the door down. It floods the basement. It sets fire to what needs to burn. Enantiodromia, Jung called it, the tendency of things to transform into their opposite when pushed to an extreme. You build a life of relentless strength, and the psyche responds with illness that forces you into vulnerability. You construct an identity around being needed, and suddenly everyone leaves. You chase achievement with single-minded focus, and emptiness swallows you whole. The psyche seeks balance, wholeness, integration. When we live too far in one direction, denying and repressing its opposite, the unconscious erupts to restore equilibrium. This eruption feels like catastrophe. It is actually correction. But here, in this moment of rupture, most of us make a fatal error. We try to fix the pain, to medicate it, to make it go away as quickly as possible so we can return to normal. We treat suffering as malfunction rather than message. We want comfort restored, the fortress rebuilt, the sleep resumed. And sometimes we succeed, at least temporarily. We numb ourselves back into functioning. We reconstruct the persona. We bury the crisis beneath new distractions and call it healing. Yet the pain returns. Always it returns. Because nothing has been learned. The message has not been received. The shadow still waits in the darkness, patient as ever. The self still hungers for consciousness, and the universe, which loves you enough to refuse your unconsciousness, will send the pain again. This time louder, deeper, more insistent, not because it is cruel, but because you matter, because your awakening matters, because the authentic life you are meant to live cannot be lived from inside the fortress of comfortable sleep. This is the terrible, beautiful truth that pain carries. You are ready. Not ready for more suffering necessarily, but ready for consciousness. Ready to feel what you have been avoiding, ready to see what you have been denying, ready to meet the parts of yourself you banished long ago. The pain comes precisely when the soul has grown strong enough to bear its own truth, when the psyche is finally prepared to integrate what it has held in the darkness. Pain is proof that the universe believes in your capacity to awaken. So the alarm rings through the darkened house. The earthquake cracks the foundation. The flood rises in the basement, and you stand at the threshold of a choice that will determine everything. Will you silence the alarm and go back to sleep? Or will you finally wake up? To awaken is to stop fighting the pain and begin listening to it. This is not surrender. It is something far more radical. It is the moment you turn toward the suffering that has been chasing you and ask for the first time with genuine openness, "What are you trying to tell me?" In that turning, everything changes. The enemy becomes the teacher. The catastrophe reveals itself as initiation, and the pain that seemed designed to destroy you is suddenly illuminated as the very force that has been trying to save you all along. This is where the real work begins. Not the work of escape, but the work of descent. Jung knew that consciousness requires us to go down before we can rise, to enter the darkness we have spent lifetimes avoiding, to feel the feelings we have armored ourselves against, to meet the shadow face to face and recognize it as our own reflection. The alchemists called this nigredo, the blackening, the stage where everything solid dissolves into formless chaos. It is the death that precedes transformation, the necessary disintegration that makes space for something new to be born. In this descent, you begin to see what your pain has been protecting. Beneath the suffering lies a landscape of unlived life, all the parts of yourself you exiled because they were too much, too intense, too inconvenient for the person you were trying to be. The rage you swallowed to be acceptable. The grief you postponed to stay functional, the desires you abandoned to meet others' expectations, the dreams you killed to be practical. All of it still alive in the darkness, waiting for recognition. And here is the paradox. Touching this material hurts even more than the original pain. When you finally allow yourself to feel the grief you have been outrunning for 20 years, when you give voice to the anger you have turned inward into depression, when you acknowledge the loneliness that has lived at the core of your busiest days, it is excruciating. This is why we resist awakening. Not because we fear happiness, but because we fear the depth of feeling that consciousness demands. To be awake is to be vulnerable. To be conscious is to be permeable. And permeability means the pain can reach you fully, without the buffer of denial or distraction. But something miraculous happens in this undefended encounter with suffering. The pain begins to speak, not in the language of symptoms to be eliminated, but in the language of symbols, of meaning, of soul. You start to understand that your anxiety was not random. It was your intuition screaming warnings you refused to hear. Your depression was not chemical malfunction. It was your authentic self dying under the weight of a false life. Your illness was not bad luck. It was your body's desperate attempt to force you to stop, to rest, to reconsider the pace and direction you had chosen. This is the transcendent function at work, the psyche's innate capacity to transform suffering into meaning, to synthesize opposing forces into something new and whole. Jung discovered that when we can hold the tension between opposites without collapsing into one side or the other, a third thing emerges, a new perspective, a deeper understanding, a more integrated way of being. The pain that once seemed meaningless becomes the raw material of wisdom. The crisis that appeared to be pure destruction reveals itself as creative destruction, clearing ground for authentic growth. Integration begins here, in this space of conscious suffering. You start reclaiming the shadow content, bringing back into awareness all that you had exiled. You give the anger permission to exist, not to act destructively, but to inform you about your boundaries and values. You welcome the grief, letting it wash through you, baptizing you back into your own tenderness. You acknowledge the parts of yourself you had deemed unacceptable and discover that in accepting them, they lose their power to control you from the unconscious. What we own cannot own us. What we illuminate cannot ambush us. This is individuation, Jung's term for the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you were conditioned to be. It is not self-improvement in the shallow sense of optimization. It is self-recovery, self-recognition, self-authorship. You begin to distinguish between the persona, that social mask you wore to survive, and the self, that deeper organizing principle that holds your unique constellation of capacities, wounds, and purpose. The persona was never wrong. It was simply incomplete. But mistaking it for the totality of who you are was the sleep. Knowing the difference is the beginning of awakening. And here the question shifts entirely. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? That is the victim's question, the sleeper's question, the question that keeps you powerless and resentful. Instead, you begin asking, what is this calling me toward? What am I being asked to become? What old skin must I shed? What new capacity is struggling to be born? These are the questions of the conscious participant, the individual taking responsibility for their own transformation. They are questions that contain within them the seeds of liberation. From this vantage point, you can finally see the architecture of your suffering. The pattern becomes visible. You see how you abandoned yourself repeatedly in the same ways, how you chose the familiar pain over the unfamiliar freedom, how you betrayed your own knowing to maintain relationships or identities that no longer served your becoming. You see the generational patterns, the inherited wounds, the unconscious scripts you were performing without ever questioning who wrote them. And in seeing all this clearly, you gain the power to choose differently. This is consciousness as sacred responsibility. You can no longer claim ignorance. You can no longer blame your parents, your circumstances, your trauma, your chemistry for everything you are. Not because those things did not shape you, they did, profoundly, but because once you are awake, you must answer for what you do with your awareness. You become the author of your own narrative, the alchemist of your own transformation. The past does not disappear, but it no longer determines the future. You have stepped into creative tension with your own life. The alchemy continues. Negredo gives way to albedo, the whitening, the clarification, the emergence of new understanding. What was confused becomes clear. What was fragmented begins to cohere. You start to discern the shape of your authentic life, the one that was always underneath the performance, waiting for permission to be lived. It may look nothing like what you planned. It may require you to disappoint people, to abandon securities, to walk away from accomplishments that once defined you. But it will feel real in a way nothing else ever has. It will feel like coming home to yourself. And strangely, gratefully, you begin to understand the gift the pain was carrying, not in some cheap, spiritually bypassing way that minimizes the suffering. The pain was real. The losses were devastating. The wounds were deep. Nothing about that was good. But what the pain revealed, what it forced you to face, what it compelled you to integrate, that was necessary. That was love disguised as suffering. That was the universe refusing to let you waste your one irreplaceable life in comfortable unconsciousness. Jung himself spoke of this paradox, that the greatest blessings often arrive in the form of terrible troubles, that what wounds us most deeply is often what heals us most completely. His own descent into near madness became the foundation of his life's work and wisdom. The darkness he entered taught him about light. The disintegration he survived taught him about wholeness. The suffering he endured taught him about meaning. This is the wisdom the awakened life carries, that consciousness is not comfortable, but it is real. That authenticity is not easy, but it is vital. That wholeness is not the same as happiness, but it is infinitely more sustaining. You will still feel pain. Awakening does not grant immunity from suffering, but the pain will no longer be meaningless. It will speak to you, guide you, teach you. You will meet it as an advisor rather than an enemy, a messenger rather than a curse. And you will find, to your surprise, that being fully alive, even with all its difficulty, even with the vulnerability consciousness demands, is better than any sleep you ever knew. The world becomes vivid again. Colors sharpen. Meaning returns to small moments. You taste your food. You feel the air on your skin. You notice the way light changes everything. You cry at beauty and injustice. You laugh from your belly. You love with your whole heart, knowing it will break and loving anyway, because that is what hearts are for. This is what the universe was always calling you toward. Not perfection, not invulnerability, not the achievement of some final state of peace, but full participation in the sacred, difficult, magnificent experience of being human, conscious, awake, alive. The pain that broke you open was never punishment. It was the universe's most intimate whisper, spoken at the volume you needed to finally hear. It is time to wake up and live.